Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we drift under a velvet Egyptian sky, where ancient stones glisten like sleepy giants in the moonlight. The desert exhales warm silence, and the pyramids of Giza loom ahead, quiet, but not quite still, like they're holding back a secret. Or 10. Some say they're just tombs, others whisper they're much, much more. One thing's certain, they weren't meant to be understood easily, and they probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your city and the local time. It's always wild to see how far this sleepy caravan stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand crunches beneath unseen feet as we approach the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest of the three sentinels standing tall on the Giza Plateau. It's just past midnight, and the moonlight reveals subtle details most people miss in the glaring daylight. There's something unnerving about how perfect it is. 440 cubits per side, aligned so precisely with true north that modern compasses blush. The error margin, about 3/60ths of a degree, like someone just eyeballed the planet's cardinal points and nailed it. In the dark stillness, it doesn't feel like a monument. It feels like a machine, waiting. This giant, built from over 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, somehow rose without cranes, bulldozers, or a single Home Depot run. That alone is suspicious enough. But here's the kicker. There's not a trace of mortar between those blocks. Just gravity and a level of precision that rivals laser cutting. You can't slip a credit card between the seams. Not even one of those contactless ones. Mainstream history says these marvels were constructed around 2560 BCE, allegedly in just 20 years. That breaks down to setting one block every 2 minutes, around the clock, for 2 decades, without rest, without error, without leaving behind one single chisel. Let's pause here. Try stacking Legos with your eyes closed for 20 years, and somehow they're earthquake-proof, still standing while modern buildings in Cairo throw tantrums during minor tremors. The site isn't just visually mind-boggling, it's geologically peculiar too. The base of the Great Pyramid is carved into solid bedrock, smooth to near perfection. Some geologists point to signs of water erosion, suggesting the base was exposed to heavy rainfall for centuries, maybe even millennia. That would place the structure's origins far earlier than the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, potentially before the Sahara even became a desert. Historians still argue whether these erosion patterns are natural or indicate an age nobody wants to admit. And if that weren't enough, the pyramid's sides, yes, the ones that look perfectly flat, are actually ever so slightly concave. All 4 faces gently curve inward, a detail only discovered thanks to aerial photography in the 20th century. This means the builders weren't just stacking stones. They were sculpting with mathematical intentionality on a scale we can barely replicate today. And yet not a single record describes how or why. No papyrus scrolls, no wall carvings, no smudged post-it notes. Just giant, flawless geometry looming in silence. Tour guides love to throw around the term tomb, but there's something missing from that story. The bodies. No mummies were found inside the Great Pyramid. No funerary treasures, not even a decent curse. The so-called King's Chamber is eerily empty, housing only a granite box far too large to have been brought in after construction. It's almost like it was built into the room from the start, locked in before the walls rose around it. And the acoustics, oh, the acoustics. Whisper in the King's Chamber and your voice doesn't echo, it hums. Musicians and researchers who've been allowed inside say certain frequencies seem to resonate unnaturally, almost as if the room is tuned. One brave soul even called it a subwoofer for the soul. Science hasn't fully explained it, but anyone who steps in there feels it. The pyramid sings back. In daylight hours, the pyramid is a selfie magnet, but in the moonlight it feels different. It feels alive. Its colossal presence shrinks the modern world to dust. Imagine standing in front of it 5,000 years ago. No cities, no noise. Just this impossible structure casting shadows over the sand. The local Bedouins have long said that the pyramid isn't just old, it predates all memory. They call it Iket, meaning glorious light. Some believe it was never meant for the dead at all, but for the stars. A beacon, a map, a library carved in stone. And then there's the odd shape of the land itself. The 3 pyramids of Giza align almost perfectly with Orion's belt, a detail that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. But more on that later. For now, just picture the labour. Tens of thousands of workers, or maybe fewer, using techniques lost to time, dragging those stone blocks up what must have been miles of ramps. Or maybe they didn't drag them at all. One fringe theory, albeit popular among conspiracy circles, suggests the stones were softened using an unknown chemical formula. The idea is that builders poured a kind of concrete on site, casting each block in place. French materials scientist Joseph Davidovits has spent years exploring this possibility, pointing out that certain stones show microscopic air bubbles, more common in man-made materials than quarried rock. But mainstream Egyptology snubs the idea like a snooty cat turning down gourmet tuna. Still, the debate simmers. Then there's the strange magnetism. Multiple visitors and researchers have noted compass anomalies near the pyramid, where true north seems to shift subtly. And while that could be explained by local interference or magnetic minerals in the stone, it still adds to the weirdness pile. Speaking of oddities, no one talks enough about the pyramid's height. Originally 481 feet, it stood as the tallest human-made structure for nearly 4,000 years. That's a record not even Rome, China, or the Industrial Revolution could beat until the Lincoln Cathedral snuck past it. Barely in the 14th century. Think about that. For almost all of human civilization, this triangle in the desert was Earth's tallest structure. And while most tourist brochures chalk it up to slave labour, ancient graffiti inside the pyramid tells a different tale. It mentions work gangs with names like the Drunkards of Menkor or the Friends of Khufu. These sound less like enslaved masses and more like frat bros on a mystical construction bender. But then again, historians still argue whether those markings are original or the result of 19th century enthusiasm gone rogue. The more you examine the Great Pyramid, the less it makes sense as a simple tomb. It feels more like an artifact left behind by a civilization that understood the cosmos, engineering and acoustics in a way we still haven't caught up with. Maybe that's the real reason people get so cagey when asked how it was built. Not because they know, but because they don't. So as the moon arcs higher and the sand grows cooler beneath the breeze, we step back from the towering face of the pyramid, humbled and confused. This was just supposed to be a pile of rocks, right? And yet it whispers. The moon hasn't budged much in the sky, but the air feels different now, more alert, as if the desert itself is listening. Our gaze shifts from the hulking silhouette of the Great Pyramid to the texture of its skin, limestone glowing softly in the night. These outer casing stones, now mostly gone, once covered the entire pyramid, polished to a mirror finish so reflective that it reportedly shone like a second sun during the day. Imagine standing miles away and seeing a giant white beacon shimmering in the heat waves, ancient Vegas, minus the slot machines. According to Arab historians, many of the casing stones were quarried off in later centuries for use in mosques and city walls. What remains now are the rugged inner cores, jagged and raw like a peeled fruit. But in those lost outer layers lies another question. How did they achieve that level of polish and perfect fit using copper tools? Copper, soft as it is, isn't exactly stonecarver's delight. Try using a butter knife to sculpt granite and you'll see what I mean. Yet somehow, these ancient builders carved tens of thousands of stones, many from red granite brought from Aswan, over 500 miles away. That granite is so hard it can only be cut today with diamond-tipped blades, and yet, here it is, smooth, sharp-edged, and nestled into perfect alignment. In the so-called King's Chamber, the sarcophagus is made of this same unforgiving granite. It wasn't just placed in the room, it was part of the room from the very beginning, carved with internal corners so sharp they baffle even modern machinists. The chamber's walls, ceiling and floor all resonate at a specific frequency, hinting again at sonic properties we're only beginning to understand. Mainstream scholars suggest ancient Egyptians may have used dolerite pounding stones to slowly chip away at granite, slowly being the polite understatement of the millennium. Even with unrelenting effort, this technique wouldn't account for the clean symmetry and machine-like finish seen in many of the blocks, at least not without a time frame that stretches well beyond 20 years. One curious example is the unfinished obelisk still lying in the Aswan quarry. It's a behemoth, over 1,000 tons, longer than a Boeing 747, and was abandoned due to cracks that formed during its extraction. But the odd part isn't its size, it's the way the stone was carved, in smooth, evenly spaced horizontal scoops, like someone had a giant mechanical ice cream scoop and just kept going. No jagged hammer marks, no chaos, just serene rhythmic precision. And no one really knows how. Enter fringe theorists. Not satisfied with copper chisels and wooden sleds, they propose alternatives ranging from vibrational cutting tools to sound-based levitation. The latter, especially, is gaining popularity in alternative archaeology circles. Tibetan monks have long told tales of moving heavy stones with chanting and trumpets. It sounds ridiculous, until you consider experiments showing that certain frequencies can indeed make objects levitate under controlled conditions. Granted, we're not talking boulders yet, but the idea persists. And so does the legend of the lost high technology. This catch-all term refers to any technique, device or process used by ancient builders that we can't replicate or even fully explain today. From inexplicable drill marks on granite to mirror-smooth basins carved out of single stone blocks, the evidence seems to defy simple explanation. Maybe it's not that the ancients had UFOs tucked away under their linen tunics. Maybe it's that they knew something we've forgotten. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian tools and methods, as understood today, are sufficient to explain the scale and finesse of the pyramids. The consensus says yes, but a growing chorus of engineers, stonemasons and outsiders quietly shakes their heads. When you hear modern stoneworkers say they wouldn't take on Khufu's pyramid even with today's tech, you start to wonder if we're missing something vital, like a lost chapter in the Manual of Civilization. Let's not forget the mortar. Yes, the pyramids used it, but not how you think. The type of mortar found between some blocks isn't just an adhesive. It's microscopic, tightly bound, and still holding strong after 4,500 years. Chemists who've analysed it can't fully replicate the composition. It's as if the mixture includes an ingredient that doesn't quite belong. A kind of ancient nanotech concrete that shrugs off weather and time like a bored teenager at a family reunion. And then there's the question of transportation. Moving 2 million blocks to the plateau sounds like the worst group project in history. The standard theory involves sledges, water lubrication, and ramps. Lots of ramps. Ramps bigger than the pyramid itself, curving around it in spirals or stretching out like the world's least fun amusement park ride. But there's no physical evidence of these ramps, no remnants, no diagrams, not even vague mentions in inscriptions. A fringe suggestion proposes the use of internal ramps within the pyramid, like a corkscrew tunnel through which blocks were manoeuvred as construction progressed upward. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin has championed this theory, backing it with computer simulations and 3D models, but without access to the inner structure, which Egypt's Antiquities Authority guards like the recipe for Coca-Cola, it remains speculation. Another oddity, the levelling. The pyramid's base is nearly perfectly flat, within just a fraction of an inch across 13 acres. Engineers admit this kind of precision requires laser levels today. Ancient Egyptians supposedly achieved it with water trenches. Maybe. But maintaining that flatness while stacking millions of stones seems like balancing a house of cards during an earthquake. Inside the pyramid, the Grand Gallery is another enigma. Its steep, corbelled ceiling rises nearly 30 feet, lined with evenly spaced grooves and ledges that have no obvious purpose. Some think they were meant to support scaffolding. Others suspect they housed something mechanical, perhaps involving counterweights or a power source. What kind of power source? Well, that's where things get murky. Fringe theorists suggest everything from hydraulic resonance to electromagnetic charge. The materials used, especially the piezoelectric granite, might have been selected for more than durability. Piezoelectricity, the ability to generate electric charge under pressure, is a real phenomenon. If the granite was used deliberately to harness this effect, it implies a level of understanding modern science only quantified in the 19th century. Either that, or it's one of the wildest coincidences in architectural history. And then we have the air shafts. Misnamed, really. They don't ventilate anything. These narrow, smooth tunnels shoot out of the king's and queen's chambers at precise angles, aligning with specific stars like Sirius and Orion's belt. The shafts are too small for humans to pass through, and until recent decades no one had even explored their full length. When robot probes finally did, they found something even stranger. Miniature doors with copper handles far into the stone, leading to more mystery. We still don't know what's behind them. Permission to open them stalled indefinitely. Why design such a system unless it served a symbolic or energetic function? Why waste resources on non-functional star-pointing tunnels? Maybe the pyramid isn't just stone. Maybe it's a map or a code. There's a growing theory that each element of the pyramid, from its dimensions to its materials, was chosen for mathematical and energetic reasons. The pyramid's height relates to the Earth's circumference. The perimeter, when divided by twice the height, approximates pi. The ratio of the base to height mimics phi, the golden ratio. And if all this sounds like numerology, consider this. Most of it wasn't even discovered until the 1800s, long after the pyramid had been dismissed as little more than a fancy grave. The architects, whoever they were, encoded complex mathematics and cosmic relationships into stone without a written blueprint. That should be impossible. Yet there it is, under the stars, whispering secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. As the wind picks up and sweeps sand against our ankles, we stand not just at a monument, but at the edge of understanding. Somewhere between limestone and starlight lies the truth, sharper than copper, deeper than hieroglyphs, and we've only just begun brushing the dust from its surface. The night deepens and the pyramids shift from silent guardians to unsolved riddles cloaked in stone. A breeze brushes past as if trying to whisper something long forgotten, something erased, because for all their size and presence there's something strangely absent from Egypt's greatest architectural achievement. Blueprints. No plans, no diagrams, no scribbled notes in a temple corner or sketches on limestone slabs, not even a doodle in the margins of a sacred scroll. Think about that. The greatest construction project of the ancient world, possibly of all time, and there's not a single surviving record of how it was done. Historians still argue whether this absence is due to poor preservation, destruction over time, or perhaps something more intentional. After all, pharaohs chronicled their breakfast menus, but somehow forgot to mention the assembly instructions for a 6 million ton triangle. If this were modern times, there'd be time-lapse drone footage, blueprints in a museum, and 40-minute behind-the-scenes YouTube docs narrated by someone with a British accent. But instead, we get nothing. Not even graffiti bragging about the design. Just some crew nicknames scrawled in a few inner blocks, likely left by labour teams, not architects. Some claim those nicknames are all the proof we need, that Khufu's workers did the job, end of story. But pause for a moment. If your team built a structure visible from space, would you really stop at signing your name? Or would you immortalise the methods, the math, the genius behind the blueprint? The silence feels suspicious. Not accidental, but curated. In fact, the pyramid's own layout might be the only plan left behind, encoded in dimensions, angles and alignments, rather than ink and papyrus. And it's a plan we're still trying to decode. Every few years, a new study or scan emerges revealing another void or tunnel, another deviation from what we thought we knew, and yet official maps of the interior rarely change. There's something hesitant about revising the narrative. Let's wander back into the Grand Gallery. This ascending corridor is far taller and grander than needed for a burial passage. Why make it so massive? And why carve the walls with a series of evenly spaced notches, grooves that serve no obvious structural purpose? Theories abound. Some suggest the gallery was used to move a counterweight system, raising or lowering massive stones. Others speculate it was a resonant chamber for some kind of energy device. Still others shrug and call it ceremonial, architecture for theatre's sake. But even that doesn't satisfy, because the deeper you go, the less the structure behaves like a tomb, and the more it behaves like a circuit board. That's not just poetic metaphor. Engineers have compared the layout of the pyramid's chambers and shafts to the logic of electrical circuitry. You have input shafts, energy storage chambers, resonance channels. It's as if someone designed a building that isn't just architecture, it's functional, or was. The Queen's Chamber, strangely empty and centred within the pyramid's mass, also lacks funerary decorations. Some believe it wasn't even meant for a human occupant at all. Its walls once housed salt deposits, an odd feature, unless it served a chemical purpose. Combine that with the granite in the King's Chamber, and a few theorists begin mumbling about electrolysis, vapour pressure, even hydrogen production. It sounds wild, until you realise the geometry supports the idea of directed energy flow, and just like that, a burial site begins to feel more like a power station. Back outside, the broader Giza complex adds another layer to this enigma. Consider the layout. 3 major pyramids aligned with uncanny precision, mirroring the stars of Orion's belt. The spacing isn't just close, it's a match, even correcting for the slight curvature of Earth. There's no practical reason for tombs to be built in such a celestial configuration, unless aligning with the stars served some unknown, perhaps energetic purpose. If the layout is a star map, then the Great Pyramid may be the cosmic centerpiece, and that map, some argue, extends far beyond Egypt. Other ancient sites, from Teotihuacan to Angkor Wat, show geometric and astronomical correlations to Giza, often echoing the same ratios or patterns. Could it be intentional? If so, then we're looking not at isolated monuments, but nodes in a lost global network, one that used Earth's geography as its canvas. And then comes the question no one wants to ask aloud. What if the blueprints never existed in physical form at all? What if the knowledge to build the pyramids wasn't written down because it didn't need to be? Some ancient myths speak of a spoken knowledge, passed orally through priest engineers and initiated builders, guided by memory and sacred geometry rather than paper and pen. In this tradition, building wasn't just engineering, it was a ritual, a sacred act of mirroring heaven on earth. The pyramid was built not from plans, but from pattern. It was assembled like a chant, each block a syllable in a hymn older than words. But if that knowledge was once preserved through oral tradition, where did it go? Many point to the burning of the Library of Alexandria as a watershed moment in the loss of ancient wisdom. The scrolls there may not have included pyramid blueprints, but they likely held contextual knowledge, records of older dynasties, vanished technologies, strange devices referenced in now lost texts. The library's destruction was no simple accident of war. It was a cultural reset. And let's not forget, the ancient Egyptian civilization didn't start with grandeur. It began already at a high point. The Old Kingdom, which birthed the pyramids, appears suddenly in the archaeological record with advanced knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and urban planning. Where's the learning curve? There's no clear build-up, no decades of trial and error, just bang. Geometry, logistics, astronomy, precision stonework, all in place from the get-go. It's as if they inherited something they couldn't quite replicate once it was gone. That might explain why later pyramids, such as those at Saqqara and Dashur, are, well, disappointing. They're smaller, cruder, often incomplete or collapsed. The bent pyramid even changes angle halfway up, as if the builders lost confidence, or understanding, as they progressed. It's like watching a great song covered poorly by a band that doesn't quite remember how the melody goes. Historians still argue whether this degradation was due to resource shortages, evolving styles, or political upheaval. But if you line up the pyramid timeline visually, it's hard to miss the downward slope in quality and ambition. The greatest pyramid, the Great Pyramid, came first, not last. That alone should make us pause. Some believe the original knowledge was preserved by a secret priesthood, a lineage of master builders whose secrets were guarded fiercely. Over time, that lineage may have thinned, splintered, or been intentionally erased. One theory even suggests that a societal shift, from collective memory to bureaucratic control, led to the loss of intuitive sacred science. Once temples became political, the knowledge slipped away. And what if that loss wasn't just accidental? What if it was curated? Suppose someone wanted the blueprint to vanish. Not just the physical plans, but the very memory of how they worked. That would explain why later dynasties focused more on tombs and temples, filled with flashy inscriptions and personal iconography. It's as if the original message, whatever the pyramid was meant to say, got drowned out by ego and gold leaf. Now picture this. You're an ancient scribe standing on the plateau watching the final capstone being lowered into place by means you can't quite comprehend. Around you, elders murmur in a tongue half forgotten, and the entire structure hums with energy. Literal or metaphorical, you're not sure. You're witnessing not just a burial, but a transmission, a data vault sealed in stone. And you know instinctively that one day the keys will be lost. The world will forget. But maybe, just maybe, someone will remember how to listen. And maybe, on nights like this, when the stars align and the sand breathes, someone still is. The stars have shifted slightly now, tracing slow arcs across the sky, but Orion still hovers just above the horizon, his belt glittering in perfect alignment with the Giza pyramids. It's a cosmic wink, one carved into the earth with such eerie precision that it continues to defy explanation. If you didn't know better, you might think the pyramids weren't built to mimic the stars, but to guide them. The ancient Egyptians were no strangers to the sky. Their myths are soaked in starlight, their gods tangled in constellations, their temples angled to catch equinoxes and solstices like clockwork. But with the Great Pyramid, the astronomy takes a sharp turn, from spiritual to surgical, because encoded into its dimensions are not just pretty patterns, but some of the most precise mathematical constants known to man. Take pi, for instance. Yes, that irrational number you last saw in high school math. If you divide the perimeter of the pyramid's base by twice its height, you get 3.1416, accurate to the fourth decimal. Now, maybe you think that's a coincidence. After all, if you build enough triangles, one of them's bound to stumble into pi. Fair enough. But then there's the golden ratio, phi. The pyramid's slope, the angle of its faces, the proportion of its height to the base, all evoke phi with uncanny accuracy. This ratio shows up everywhere in nature. Snail shells, hurricanes, the spiral arms of galaxies. It's often called the divine proportion, and the Great Pyramid wears it like a tailored suit. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians knew these constants intentionally, or stumbled into them by accident. There's no written proof that they understood pi or phi as abstract numbers. But the stones don't lie, and the way these ratios are embedded into the structure, again and again, feels less like luck and more like code. But math isn't the only number game happening here. The Great Pyramid's height, when multiplied by 43,200, equals the polar radius of Earth. Its base perimeter, multiplied by the same number, equals the planet's equatorial circumference. That number, 43,200, just so happens to be a key harmonic in ancient cosmology, linked to the precession of the equinoxes. You know, that 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis that shifts the stars over millennia. Now imagine being an ancient builder and encoding not just your culture's myths, but your planet's size, shape and astronomical rhythms into a pile of limestone. No iPads, no telescopes, just math and intuition. Or maybe something else. Even more eyebrow-raising is the pyramid's orientation. Its sides don't just roughly face the cardinal directions, they line up with astonishing precision. Modern GPS confirms that the pyramid points within 3/60ths of a degree to true north. That's better than the Greenwich Observatory managed in the 1800s. And here we are, claiming this was achieved with plumb bobs and sight lines. Some researchers suggest the builders may have used the stars themselves, specifically the circumpolar stars, which never set and could serve as stable markers, but aligning a 13-acre base to true north using only the night sky. That's the kind of feat that makes surveyors twitch with envy. And it wasn't done once, it was done over and over in multiple pyramid sites across Egypt. Then there's the spacing between the three main pyramids. At first glance they seem randomly placed, until you look up. Their layout matches the pattern of Orion's belt almost exactly, with a slight offset of the third star mirrored in the smallest pyramid. Even more striking, the alignment matches not the current position of the stars, but their placement around 10,500 BCE. That date isn't chosen at random. It coincides with the dawn of the astrological age of Leo, a time when the constellation Leo would have risen due east behind the Sphinx, which itself bears the unmistakable body of a lion. Coincidence? Possibly, but the patterns keep stacking up. The theory known as the Orion correlation has been dismissed by many Egyptologists as coincidence or retroactive pattern seeking. But independent researchers argue that the consistency of these correlations across different structures and astronomical scales suggests something deeper, a kind of encoded message, a timestamp in stone. It's not just Orion either. Other celestial alignments have been proposed. The shafts in the King's Chamber point towards specific stars, including Alnitak in Orion's belt and Thuban, the North Star of 2600 BCE. Again, maybe it's symbolic, but when symbolism involves the precise orientation of stone tunnels drilled through hundreds of feet of limestone, it starts to feel deliberate. In the Queen's Chamber, two more shafts point towards Sirius and Koshab. Again, stars of significance in ancient Egyptian religion and myth. Sirius was the star of Isis, associated with rebirth and the Nile's flooding. Koshab was a circumpolar star used for navigation. These aren't random dots in the sky, they were the anchors of an entire worldview. All this points to a civilization that not only watched the sky, but wove it into their architecture with surgical precision. Not just spiritual reverence, but measurable, repeatable design. They didn't just build to impress the gods, they built to reflect them. Let's not forget, the ancient Egyptians were obsessive record keepers, but not one carving inside the Great Pyramid references its construction, purpose, or symbolism. This suggests either the structure predates the cultural habit of recording such things, or the knowledge was considered too sacred to document publicly. And maybe that's the real secret. The pyramid isn't just a monument or a tomb, it's a model, a scaled-down version of something bigger, perhaps the Earth itself, or the cosmos, a mirror of macrocosm in microcosm, a tool for remembering. Alternative researchers have even suggested the pyramid could be an astronomical observatory, a giant stone device for tracking precession, equinoxes, or stellar movements over centuries. If that sounds far-fetched, remember, we have entire megalithic sites like Stonehenge or Nabta Playa designed around celestial tracking. Why not the greatest structure of them all? Some go further, way further. They claim the pyramid is a repository of ancient astronomical knowledge, possibly even left by a forgotten civilization predating the dynastic Egyptians. This hypothetical culture, sometimes called the Ancient Advanced Builders, or simply the First Time, would have possessed advanced knowledge of the stars, geometry, and the Earth itself, knowledge later misunderstood or mythologized by the civilizations that followed. Mainstream scholars tend to recoil from this idea, preferring Occam's razor and a steady evolutionary view of human progress. But the problem is that the pyramid itself doesn't follow that evolution. It appears at the very beginning of Egypt's monumental architecture, as a climax, not a warm-up act. If the pyramid was intended as a star map, an energy structure, and a cosmic model all at once, then it suggests a purpose far beyond burial. It suggests a plan, a reason, a knowledge of something vast, cyclic, and deeply connected to the earth and heavens. Could it be that the builders saw themselves as stewards of a message, not just for their people, but for future ages? If so, that message is silent now, encrypted in ratios and angles, waiting for the right minds to crack it. And here's a curious thought to take with you as you stretch your toes in the sand. If the Great Pyramid mirrors the sky and its dimensions encode Earth, what else might it be modelling? Could it also be a calendar, a clock, a warning? Maybe the pyramid isn't just about where we are in space, but when we are in time. The desert air grows cooler now, heavy with midnight's hush, and still the pyramids refuse to blink. They stand unmoved, unblinking, unmoved by the thousands of years that have passed around them. But as we've seen, these monuments aren't merely inert stacks of rock. They're messages, encoded in stone and silence. And perhaps the biggest misdirection of all was calling them tombs. For generations, the official story has been relatively tidy. Pharaoh Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid to serve as his eternal resting place. Khafra and Menkaura, his successors, followed suit. Tombs, all three. And yet, this explanation wears thin the closer you look. First, let's confront the elephant-sized granite box in the king's chamber. It's called a sarcophagus, but that's based more on assumption than evidence. The lid? Missing. The carvings? Non-existent. No inscriptions, no cartouches, no signs of ceremonial decoration, not even a single hieroglyph to claim it. In a culture obsessed with the afterlife and labelling everything from cat mummies to bread ovens, that absence is suspicious. Historians still argue whether the pyramid was ever used as an actual tomb. The standard explanation says that looters cleared it out centuries ago. Fair enough, but why would they take the body and not a single trace of burial goods? No scattered amulets, no broken canopic jars, no leftover bones, no residue in the sarcophagus. Even grave robbers tend to leave crumbs. Here, there's nothing. And it's not just the Great Pyramid. The second and third pyramids also lack confirmed royal mummies. In fact, no bodies have ever been found inside the major Giza pyramids. Let that settle in. The most iconic tombs in the world have no verifiable occupants. This inconvenient truth gets swept under the sands of academic explanation. Some scholars argue that the bodies may have decomposed or been moved. Others point to confusion over dynastic naming. But the gap remains, yawning, silent, and unexplained. What if, instead of tombs, the pyramids served another purpose entirely? And what if Khufu, Khafra and Menkaure didn't build them from scratch, but repurposed them, adopted them as royal monuments long after their original builders had vanished into myth? This isn't a new idea. Ancient texts like the Westcar Papyrus describe pharaohs excavating older structures, not constructing them. Even Herodotus, writing 2,000 years after the pyramids were allegedly built, recounted stories from Egyptian priests that cast doubt on the mainstream narrative. They told him Khufu was a tyrant, yes, but also that the pyramid was already there, or at least that the story was murky even back then. Some alternative researchers suggest that the pharaohs didn't build the pyramids, but rather inherited them. They may have patched them up, added their own temples and statues, but the core structures, already ancient, already sacred, already misunderstood. One of the most tantalizing clues supporting this theory lies not above ground, but beneath it. Below the Great Pyramid lies a network of subterranean chambers, tunnels, and shafts, some explored, others sealed. The so-called subterranean chamber is cut directly into bedrock far below the pyramid's base. It's crude, almost rough-hewn compared to the elegant precision of the king's and queen's chambers, yet it's also the lowest and most mysterious part of the pyramid. What was it for? It doesn't match the design of a burial chamber, and no one really knows when it was made, or by whom. Was it the earliest phase of construction, a leftover from an even older monument, or perhaps something else entirely, an access point, a generator room, a vault? If we entertain the idea that the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb, we open the floodgates to other possibilities, and once that door creaks open, there's no going back. One theory proposes the pyramids were resonance devices, engineered to harness and amplify sound frequencies for unknown purposes. Another suggests they were used for initiation rituals, spiritual, psychological, or even astronomical. And then there's the big one, that the pyramids were part of a global energy system tapping into Earth's natural harmonics. We'll dive deeper into that soon. For now, let's focus on the fact that the pyramid's internal layout just doesn't make sense as a grave. The king's chamber is located near the vertical centre of the structure, far harder to access than would be necessary for a tomb. No other Egyptian tomb buries its occupant deep within a monument's core. Most are horizontal passages leading to inner chambers, easier for visitors, easier for offerings. Practical, but the pyramid is almost defiantly impractical. The Grand Gallery isn't just oversized, it's monumental. The shaft systems are baffling. The sheer effort to construct such an inaccessible burial site borders on obsessive, if not absurd, unless the purpose was never burial at all. Even the name pyramid is a modern invention. The ancient Egyptians called the Great Pyramid Akhet Khufu, meaning horizon of Khufu. The term Akhet suggests a gateway or alignment, often celestial. It implies motion, passage, a convergence of earth and sky, not exactly a restful grave. Add to this the complete lack of mummification evidence. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings are drenched in funerary symbolism, paintings, inscriptions, religious texts, grave goods and mummified remains. The pyramids at Giza, cold, dark and silent. No article, no stories, just angles, geometry and stone. Some Egyptologists argue that the Great Pyramid was meant as a symbolic tomb, that its purpose was not to house a corpse, but to serve as a spiritual engine to propel the pharaoh's soul into the afterlife. That's a tempting middle ground, but it still doesn't explain the structural overkill, the astronomical precision, or the complete lack of identifying markers. Which brings us to another puzzle. If Khufu built this thing, where is the love letter? Where's the commemorative wall carving or celebratory obelisk declaring his accomplishment? Pharaohs were not humble types. They stamped their names on everything. Temples, statues, scrolls, even quarry stones. But Khufu's pyramid? Practically anonymous. The only direct reference to Khufu inside the Great Pyramid is a small set of red-painted markings in the so-called relieving chambers above the king's chamber. These marks were discovered in the 19th century by explorer Howard Weiss, who blasted his way into the chambers using gunpowder. Archaeology's gentler years, clearly. Some scholars have raised questions about the authenticity of these marks, noting inconsistencies in script style and even spelling. But without other inscriptions, they're all we've got. One signature, no portrait, no fanfare. Odd. And then there's the issue of legacy. If Khufu had built the most incredible structure on Earth, you'd expect his descendants to continue the trend. But what we see instead is a sharp decline in quality. The pyramids of Khafra and Menkaure are smaller and less precise. Later pyramids, like those at Saqqara and Meidum, crumble and collapse. The craftsmanship falls off a cliff. That's not how technology usually evolves. You don't go from iPhones to rotary dials in a generation, unless, of course, the first iPhone wasn't yours to begin with, and no one knows how to make another. The pyramid as tomb story is safe, simple, comforting. It slots neatly into our textbooks and allows us to marvel without questioning too much. But once you start tugging at its edges, the whole cloth begins to unravel. And what's underneath isn't just a different history, it's an older one, a deeper one. So maybe the Great Pyramid isn't a grave but a time capsule, a beacon, a locked chamber of forgotten science and silent intention, built not for one man's death, but for all humanity's remembering. As the wind moves again and the stars glimmer like coded dots above, you can almost feel it, that quiet, pressing sense that these stones are more than ruins. They're messages, not in hieroglyphs but in form, not on scrolls but in silence, not just about the past, but about what we've lost. The wind slips over the desert like a sigh now, brushing against the stone faces of the pyramids as if trying to coax them to speak. But they remain mute, patient, enduring. And maybe that's the trick. They don't shout, they whisper. If you're not quiet enough, slow enough, curious enough, you'll miss it. Which brings us to one of the loudest whispers around these ancient stones, the theories that simply won't die. Let's address the sandstone sphinx in the room, aliens. The suggestion that extraterrestrials helped build the pyramids is one of the most persistent and polarizing ideas in alternative archaeology. Critics dismiss it as fringe nonsense, the stuff of late-night cable reruns and aluminum foil headgear, but supporters argue it's the only explanation that accounts for the raw impossibility of the engineering. No one is saying UFOs parked on the Giza Plateau and unloaded limestone with tractor beams. Okay, some people are saying that, but many theorists use alien more broadly, as a placeholder for a civilization not currently in our textbooks. Historians still argue whether the speed, scale and precision of pyramid construction could realistically be achieved by a Bronze Age culture with copper tools and stone sledges. The math doesn't sit comfortably. The logistics bend belief. And so, in steps the idea that either humans had help, or that humans were once far more advanced than we give them credit for. This is where the conversation splits. One camp leans toward ancient astronauts, celestial visitors sharing knowledge or even hands-on assistance. The other camp, the ancient high civilization theorists, suggest that humanity itself reached an advanced technological state long before recorded history, only to be reset by some catastrophe. Floods, pole shifts, cosmic events. Take your pick. In both cases, the pyramids are the relics, the stubborn survivors of something more, something lost. Let's play both sides for a moment. In the alien camp, proponents point to myths from around the world that speak of sky gods, visitors from the stars, and those who came from the heavens. The Dogon people of Mali, for example, possess ancient astronomical knowledge about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, only officially discovered in the 20th century. Coincidence? Ancient contact? Or something else? In Egypt, the god Thoth is said to have measured the heavens and the earth, gifted writing, and brought wisdom from beyond. Some interpretations suggest these deities weren't merely metaphorical, but memories of actual beings, possibly non-human, interacting with early societies. Ancient astronaut theorists also love the physical anomalies, drill holes in granite that seem too perfect, hieroglyphs that appear to show flying machines, like the infamous helicopter glyph in Abydos, and tales of floating stones and magical chants that moved mountains. They ask, why do so many ancient myths across the globe echo the same pattern? Gods descending from the sky, teaching humans to build, to measure, to heal. But the ancient high-tech civilization camp has its own set of arrows. They point to geological, astronomical and architectural evidence that human history stretches much further back than we've been taught. Structures like Göbekli Tepe, dated to 10,000 BCE, flip the traditional model on its head. Complex megalithic construction long before agriculture, metallurgy or written language. If humanity could build complex temples back then, who's to say Giza wasn't another legacy? In this view, the pyramids may have been constructed by a civilization with a different kind of technology, not necessarily electronics or fossil fuels, but perhaps a deep understanding of harmonics, sacred geometry, and earth energy fields. Imagine a society that didn't build microchips but mastered resonance. That didn't need cranes because it understood the subtle properties of sound, magnetism, and vibration. Technology doesn't have to look like ours, and this is where sonic levitation comes in. There are stories, obscure, yes, but persistent, of monks in Tibet levitating stones using horns and chanting. The explorer Henry Kjelsen wrote of such events in the 20th century, describing large stones being moved into place by sound alone. Engineers scoff, physicists shrug, but the stories linger, echoing across time like a forgotten chorus. Could the builders of Giza have known something we don't? Not space lasers or warp drives, but subtle, advanced methods based on sound, frequency, and resonance. In the King's Chamber, certain notes create deep, body-vibrating tones. Researchers have brought instruments into the chamber, struck tones, and recorded harmonic responses unlike anything found in typical architecture. Not echoes, responses. Then there's the idea of acoustic levitation, a phenomenon demonstrated in modern labs where sound waves suspend small objects in mid-air. We're not hoisting boulders yet, but the principle is there. If this technology was scaled up or amplified using natural materials like quartz and granite, could it be possible to move multi-ton blocks, not with brute force, but with tuned vibration? Even mainstream science has begun to explore the odd relationship between geometry, material, and sound. Cymatics, the study of visible sound vibrations, reveals how frequencies create complex patterns in water, sand, or metal. Could the pyramid, in some mysterious way, have been tuned to resonate with the Earth itself? Historians still argue whether such ideas are just the fantasies of overcaffeinated researchers or glimpses into a forgotten paradigm. But as evidence continues to emerge of ancient cultures understanding star movements, building earthquake-resistant structures, and transporting megaliths over impossible terrain, the line between myth and memory blurs. And then there's the question of who actually built the pyramids. The Egyptians, sure, but which Egyptians? Carvings speak of the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus, a semi-divine race said to have ruled before the pharaohs. Ancient king lists, like the Turin Canon and the Palermo Stone, describe pre-dynastic kings reigning for tens of thousands of years. Mainstream scholars dismiss these as mythological embellishments, but why record them at all? Why assign dates and names? Perhaps these were not gods, but real figures, leaders of a lost epoch whose achievements were later deified, their tools forgotten, their methods misinterpreted as magic. And let's not forget that much of what we know about ancient Egypt was filtered through Greek and Roman lenses long after the original culture had declined. What if we've been reading a third-hand copy of a story that was already censored? A game of historical telephone with millennia of distortion. The Sphinx, sitting beside the pyramids like a weathered sentinel, offers further complications. Geological studies of its enclosure suggest water erosion, not wind and sand, cut the stone walls. If true, this would date the Sphinx to a period of heavy rainfall, possibly 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, long before the accepted timeline. Egyptologists push back, saying the erosion could be caused by other factors. But the evidence is literal. It's in the stone, eroded by something soft and wet that hasn't visited the Giza Plateau in thousands of years. So what's left? An ancient monument with unknown origins, mathematical constants encoded into its design, alignment with the stars, chambers that hum, passageways that don't make sense for burial, no mummies, no blueprints, no definitive answers, and legends from every corner of the globe, whispering of sky beings, lost knowledge, and ages erased by time. Whether you lean toward aliens, forgotten empires, or improbable genius, the truth is clear. The pyramids don't fit in the neat box we've built for them. They're too sharp, too vast, too strange, and maybe that's the point. Maybe they were never meant to be understood at a glance. Maybe they were built to endure questions, not offer answers, to challenge assumptions, to outlast civilizations, to whisper across the sands of time, "Remember, you knew once, you can know again." As we gaze up at the stars, the same stars those ancient architects studied so long ago. It's hard not to wonder if someone, somewhere, is still listening. The stars press down now, quieter and more distant, while the sand seems to settle like a sigh across the Giza plateau. Everything is still. But beneath our feet the story continues, not above ground, but far below. Because while the pyramids are towering mysteries in plain sight, some of their most confounding secrets lie hidden in darkness, buried under stone, shadow, and centuries of silence. Let's descend, not metaphorically but literally, into the cryptic underworld of the Great Pyramid. Beneath this colossal structure lies a chamber that's often forgotten, overshadowed by the more famous kings' and queens' chambers. But this chamber, commonly known as the subterranean chamber, may be the most puzzling of them all. Cut deep into the bedrock, its rough-hewn walls stand in stark contrast to the geometric precision above. No smooth granite, no polished limestone, just raw, unrefined stone. It's unfinished. Or at least, it looks that way. There's a pit at its centre, a strange side shaft cut off at an odd angle, and a dead silence that feels expectant. Why would the pyramid's builders go to the enormous trouble of carving this chamber so far below the surface, only to leave it looking abandoned? Was it a false start? A discarded plan? Or perhaps something intentionally primitive, meant to function differently than the finished rooms above? Historians still argue whether the subterranean chamber was a ceremonial space, an early design phase, or something more technological. Some fringe theorists go a step further and suggest it wasn't unfinished at all, but functional, like a foundation stone anchoring the pyramid to specific vibrational energies of the Earth itself. This idea might sound wild until you realise the Giza Plateau isn't just some convenient patch of desert, it's one of the most geologically stable areas in Egypt. And more intriguingly, it sits directly atop underground aquifers, vast layers of water-bearing rock, and that's where things start to get energetic. Water, under pressure, flowing through limestone and granite, that's more than geology, that's physics, and some researchers believe it's also a clue. The pyramid power plant theory, popularised by engineer Christopher Dunn, suggests that the Great Pyramid was never designed as a tomb at all, but as a machine. Not a metaphorical machine, but a literal one, a kind of massive passive generator built to harness Earth's natural energies. According to this hypothesis, the movement of groundwater beneath the pyramid would generate vibrations, subtle but constant. The granite in the king's chamber, rich in quartz, would then amplify these vibrations. Piezoelectricity, remember? Granite under stress produces electric charge. The chamber's geometry, combined with the Grand Gallery's odd acoustic properties, could potentially resonate at specific frequencies. It's like turning the entire pyramid into a tuned circuit, collecting, concentrating, and perhaps distributing energy. And those so-called air shafts? Not for ventilation. According to this theory, they acted like waveguides or channels for electromagnetic radiation. Some even speculate they were lined with conductive materials now long lost, or removed. It sounds incredible. And yes, many mainstream Egyptologists roll their eyes hard enough to sprain something. But here's the thing, no one has conclusively disproven it either. Dunn's ideas rely not on New Age mysticism, but on engineering principles. He's not alone. Other researchers have analysed the Giza site and found telltale hints of harmonic design. Chambers tuned to the Earth's resonance, dimensions matching Earth's natural vibration modes, even connections to ancient sonic devices in other cultures. The theory ties into a larger global puzzle, that ancient monuments were built at key geodetic points to form a kind of planetary energy grid. In this view, the Great Pyramid wasn't alone. It was part of a system, perhaps stretching across continents, built to stabilise or manipulate natural energies. The exact purpose remains unclear. Was it for communication, healing, weather manipulation, power generation, all of the above, or something we can't yet imagine? Skeptics often ask, where's the wiring? Where are the control panels? But that assumes a form of technology similar to ours. What if this was a different kind of tech? Organic, harmonic, analogue in ways we've lost touch with. Ancient cultures were deeply attuned to the planet's rhythms. Maybe they didn't need copper coils. Maybe they worked with resonance, material properties, and sacred geometry. Speaking of geometry, let's revisit the dimensions of the pyramid again. not just for their mathematical elegance, but their implications. The entire structure is layered with numerical codes. Some scholars believe the layout encodes knowledge of the speed of light, the Earth's circumference, axial tilt, and even the dimensions of the moon. Too many coincidences? Possibly. But remember, the pyramid's core layout is based on ratios, proportions, not units. That means these values remain meaningful across scales. It's as if the builders were embedding universal constants, not for decoration, but for function. And this brings us back to the idea of the pyramid as a tuning fork. The king's chamber in particular behaves strangely under sound. Hit the right frequency, and it doesn't just echo, it hums. Some visitors describe feeling the sound in their bones, not their ears. This chamber wasn't just built, it was crafted, shaped to resonate. Now add in the granite box, too big to fit through the passageways, clearly placed before the chamber was sealed. It may never have held a body. But what if it held something else? A resonator, a device, or perhaps a human initiate, lying inside while the room vibrated with energy. A ritual chamber, a transformation chamber, a portal of some kind, not to another place, but to another state. Fringe theorists speculate that the pyramid may have been used for consciousness expansion, that its resonant frequencies could induce altered states, enhance memory, even stimulate pineal activity. It's not just wild speculation. Modern neuroscience is starting to uncover how certain sound frequencies affect brainwaves and consciousness. Could ancient builders have known this too? And what about the void? In 2017, a team using muon tomography, yes, cosmic ray scanning, discovered a large hidden void above the Grand Gallery. Bigger than any previously known chamber, it sits silently in the centre of the structure, with no visible access points. Its purpose remains unknown. The Egyptian authorities swiftly downplayed the discovery. The investigation stalled. No further exploration allowed. What's in that void? Storage? Structure? A hidden room sealed off long ago? Or something more exotic, like a space intentionally left open to allow energy to circulate, or resonate, within the pyramid's mass? Historians still argue whether the void is significant or just structural fluff. But considering the pyramid's obsession with symmetry, balance, and deliberate placement, accidental seems out of character. Then there's the strange magnetism. Some visitors report compass anomalies around the pyramid's base. Electronic devices sometimes glitch. Birds don't always fly over it. And water, when left sitting inside the pyramid, reportedly decays slower, as if time itself runs differently here. You don't have to believe every rumour to feel the pattern. The structure doesn't behave like a tomb, it behaves like a machine, or at least like something designed with function in mind, purposeful, complex, precise. Whether it's truly a power plant, a consciousness chamber, or something even more arcane, one thing is clear. The pyramid's builders knew something, and they left that knowledge not in books or scrolls, but in stone, because stone endures. So as you stand above the subterranean chamber and feel the weight of the structure pressing silently down through time, you begin to wonder, is this the heart of the machine, the basement of a forgotten reactor, or a locked vault, quiet until the right moment or frequency awakens it? It hums softly now, too quiet for most to hear. But maybe that's why it's still here, waiting. Not for us to open it with shovels, but to understand it with ears that know how to listen. The dawn is still hours away, but the Giza Plateau glows faintly, bathed in the silver breath of the moon. Silence has weight here, the kind of silence that presses into your ears and settles over your skin. Not dead quiet, but dense, like something is holding its breath, waiting. And tonight we're following that breath deeper still. Not just under the pyramid, but into the shadows cast by a very peculiar glow. Yes, we're talking about light bulbs, ancient Egyptian ones, or at least something that looks suspiciously like them. Let's start with a temple hundreds of miles away from Giza, in the complex of Dendera. Deep within the Temple of Hathor lies one of the strangest reliefs in all of Egypt. Carved on the walls of a crypt-like chamber are images that baffle even seasoned archaeologists. These aren't gods in chariots or pharaohs smiting enemies. These are elongated, bulb-shaped objects held by priests, connected to what looks like a cable, resting on a platform and accompanied by a figure holding twin daggers, a symbol of power or perhaps danger. To most people seeing this for the first time, The image looks uncannily like a modern light bulb. Some even see a filament, and to fringe theorists and ancient tech enthusiasts, this is more than just metaphor, it's a smoking gun. Proof that the ancient Egyptians may have harnessed electricity. Now, mainstream Egyptologists laugh this off. They interpret the so-called dendrolite as symbolic, a depiction of the lotus flower birthing a serpent, representing creation and cosmic energy. And maybe they're right. Maybe it's myth dressed up in metaphor. But maybe, just maybe, it's a stylized diagram of a device they actually used. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians had electricity at all. There's no clear documentation, no electrical infrastructure, no ancient batteries lying in temple basements. Except, there kind of is. Enter the Baghdad battery. Discovered in modern-day Iraq, once Mesopotamia, the Baghdad battery is a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, dating back nearly 2,000 years. Add vinegar or lemon juice, and it produces a small electric current. Was it used for electroplating, medicine, religious rituals? We still don't know. But it proves that ancient people had at least some understanding of electrochemical reactions, long before Ben Franklin flew a kite in a thunderstorm. Now back to Egypt. The temples and tombs of ancient Egypt are covered in thousands of intricate carvings. Every surface is inked with care, every god depicted in full drama. But deep inside these structures, far from the sunlight, are tunnels and chambers that somehow received no burn marks from torches, no soot, no smoke residue, no fire-based lighting, and yet the art is flawless. So how did they see? Torches, reflective mirrors. Some scholars suggest polished copper mirrors were used to bounce sunlight into the depths, but copper oxidizes quickly, loses reflectivity, and certainly wouldn't carry light down the tight, twisting corridors of pyramids and tombs. Some speculate the use of a more advanced lighting system, perhaps not full-blown electric bulbs, but some sort of chemical or gas-based lamp, maybe even phosphorescent stones or resonance-induced illumination. Theories multiply like shadows in flickering candlelight. One fringe idea suggests the pyramids and temples themselves functioned as power stations, collecting and distributing low-voltage electrical energy that could have powered small devices, including bulbs. The materials used, limestone, granite, and basalt, all have properties conducive to piezoelectric or electromagnetic phenomena. Copper remnants have been found in temple ruins. Some even claim to have identified ceramic insulators, but again, nothing definitive. No smoking generator, no control panels tucked under sphinx paws, and yet the image at Dendera lingers. Once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Not just the bulb shape, but the coiled filament, the thick cord, and the grounding base, all eerily familiar to the modern eye. Skeptics are quick to caution against pareidolia, that human tendency to see patterns where none exist. You see a light bulb, they say, because that's what you expect to see. Maybe, but it's equally possible that early 20th century engineers recognised the image because it was what they used to build real bulbs, meaning both groups were tapping into the same universal archetype, or the same forgotten design. Let's set aside the literal interpretation for a moment. Whether or not the Egyptians used actual light bulbs, the presence of advanced technology in myth and art suggests something deeper. A memory, a whisper of knowledge once held, now shrouded in symbolism. Consider how advanced knowledge, when lost, becomes myth. Stories of flying machines in the Mahabharata, of Vimanas in ancient India, of fire from the sky, and roaring chariots, may not be fantasy. They may be blurred recollections of real misunderstood events. So too with the Dendera light. Perhaps it's not a light bulb in the modern sense, but a depiction of a phenomenon, a device, a technology that we simply no longer recognise for what it is. And the room it's found in? It's a crypt, sealed off, hidden, accessible only to high priests. The walls are carved with no daylight in mind. Everything about it suggests secrecy, initiation, and elite knowledge. The kind of place you'd store not just relics, but formulas. If you follow this thread, you start to see a pattern. Myths of light, sacred fire, divine glow, eternal lamps, recur across civilizations. From the Ark of the Covenant's mysterious radiance to the ever-burning lamps of Egyptian and Greek lore, ancient texts describe sources of light that defy natural explanation. Could the ancients have had access to a subtle form of energy, Something cleaner, quieter, less destructive than fire? And if so, where did it come from? Some say Atlantis. Others point to antediluvian civilizations. Still others suggest a form of vibrational energy harvested from the Earth itself. It's speculative, sure, but consider this. Nearly every breakthrough in science was speculative, until someone proved it. Back on the Giza Plateau, another detail emerges. At night, under infrared imaging, parts of the pyramid emit different thermal signatures. Hot and cold spots where there should be uniform stone. Some of these anomalies cluster around sealed doors, voids, or hidden chambers. Heat flowing? From where? If the pyramid is simply inert stone, why are its thermal properties so strange? And if, hypothetically, it were once part of a power-generating system, could it still be leaking subtle energy? Another theory proposes that the pyramid's internal structure mimics a Tesla coil, capable of generating wireless electricity using resonance and grounding. Nikola Tesla himself was fascinated by pyramids. He believed they held the key to free energy. He even built his Wardenclyffe Tower using proportions based on the Great Pyramid. Tesla claimed the Earth itself was a conductor, capable of transmitting electricity through vibration. Sounds familiar. The ancient Egyptians revered Ma'at, the principle of balance, harmony, and resonance. What if that wasn't just philosophy, but science? What if they understood how to harness the Earth's own song and encode it in stone? There's no final proof, no ancient switch waiting to be flipped. But there are patterns, threads woven through myth, art, architecture, and vibration, and the Dendera light. Whether it was a bulb, a symbol, or a story, it remains one of the most tantalizing artifacts of forgotten knowledge. So as the night deepens and the pyramid looms behind us like a slumbering titan, ask yourself this. In a world before Edison, before Tesla, before even thought of electricity, why would a priest carve the shape of a modern light bulb onto a temple wall? And who, exactly, was meant to understand it? The pyramid looms behind us still, a stone riddle glowing faintly in the darkness, but now our path drifts outward. Beyond chambers and shafts, beyond even the echo of chanting priests and bulb-shaped enigmas. Tonight, the desert itself whispers of a different kind of architecture. Not rooms or walls, but networks, circuits. Because some believe the Great Pyramid wasn't just built for the pharaoh or the stars, but for the planet. A hypothesis both exhilarating and unnerving suggests it was never alone. It's called the Pyramid Power Grid Hypothesis. The theory proposes that the pyramids at Giza, and possibly many other megalithic sites worldwide, were nodes in a vast global system designed to harness and distribute natural energy. Not power in the way we think of it today, with wires and outlets, but something more elemental, more organic, something that pulsed through the planet itself. It begins, once again, with the Great Pyramid's location. The pyramid isn't randomly plopped down in the desert. Its latitude is almost eerily perfect, 29.9792 degrees north. That number may seem innocent enough until you realise the speed of light, in meters per second, is 299,792,458. That's right. Move the decimal and you're staring at a cosmic coincidence, or a signal hiding in plain sight. Did the builders know this? Mainstream scholars say no, the meter wasn't invented yet. But fringe researchers argue the meter is derived from the Earth itself, and the builders may have used a different unit that yielded the same result. Then there's the layout. The Great Pyramid, along with its two siblings, forms a mirrored pattern of Orion's belt. True, but that's not all. When viewed from above, Giza's pyramid complex forms alignments with other sacred sites across the globe. Draw lines from Giza to Easter Island, to the Nazca Lines, to Mohenjo-Daro, to Angkor Wat, and you find they lie along or near the same Great Circle path. Some even call it the Earth Grid, or ley lines. Now, ley lines themselves are controversial. Proposed by Alfred Watkins in the 1920s, these invisible lines allegedly connect ancient monuments in straight alignments. Critics dismiss them as coincidence, pareidolia for map lovers. But the evidence stacks oddly well. Too many sites, too many alignments, too many deliberate placements on energetic hotspots. Could it be that ancient cultures, separated by oceans and time, all tuned into the same planetary grid? Historians still argue whether these connections are real or artifacts of human pattern seeking. But proponents of the grid theory believe ancient builders not only mapped Earth's energy lines, they engineered around them. Like acupuncturists placing needles into the planet's meridians, they constructed pyramids, obelisks, stone circles, and temples precisely where the Earth's energy pulsed strongest. And what if Giza was the keystone? If the Earth is indeed an energy system, dynamic, vibrating, alive, then Giza might have served as a master amplifier, a regulator, or even a transmitter. Some believe it once broadcast subtle frequencies across the globe, stabilizing or charging other sites, maintaining balance in a way we no longer understand. It sounds fantastical until you look at the materials. The Great Pyramid's core is made of limestone, a poor conductor of electricity. But its inner passages and chamber linings use granite, which contains quartz, highly responsive to pressure and capable of generating electric charge. At its peak, the pyramid may have been capped with a golden or electrum-covered stone, now lost, which would have made an excellent conductor. The base? Grounded in the bedrock, possibly connecting to the underground aquifer system beneath. A capacitor, a harmonic oscillator, a scalar antenna. Modern terms for ancient architecture, but perhaps that's what we're dealing with. Some researchers point to the similarities between Giza and the famous Tesla Tower, or Warden Cliff Tower, built by Nikola Tesla in the early 20th century. Tesla intended to transmit free wireless electricity using the Earth itself as the conduit. He believed the planet could be made to resonate at specific frequencies to allow energy to travel wirelessly across vast distances. Tesla, for the record, was fascinated by pyramids. He once said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." He studied their proportions, their orientation, their location. He even patented devices modelled after pyramid geometry. Was he inspired by ancient knowledge, or rediscovering it? Let's drift further now, past the Nile and across continents. The pyramids of China, buried and forgotten under soil and vegetation, align similarly to cardinal directions. The megaliths of Teotihuacan, with its Pyramid of the Sun, lie on similar energy lines and mimic celestial layouts. The stepped temples of Angkor Wat trace constellations in their footprint. Each site, different culture, same blueprint. Were all these cultures independently inventing the same architecture, the same alignments, the same materials, or were they inheriting a common legacy? One of the more outlandish, but strangely persistent ideas is that an ancient civilization, far older than Sumer or Egypt, once understood the energetic nature of the Earth and mapped it globally. They may have left behind the skeleton of their system in the form of pyramids, temples, and monuments. What we now consider sacred ruins may have been the infrastructure of a forgotten science. The grid hypothesis even explains a few peculiarities. Why do some pyramids have no obvious funerary function? Why do some sites, supposedly separated by millennia, show startling similarities in design and construction? Why does the same geometry show up in Egypt, Peru, China, and Mesopotamia? Because, the theory goes, they were all reading the same manual. Skeptics ask, if this was a global energy grid, where's the power output? Where are the lights, the engines, the machines? But again, this assumes technology must mimic ours. What if the energy being transmitted wasn't for industry, but biology, mood stabilization, healing, plant growth? What if these frequencies influence consciousness itself? Researchers have found that certain frequencies, 7.83 Hz, known as the Schumann resonance, match the natural vibration of the Earth and also the frequency of human alpha brainwaves. Is it possible that ancient monuments were designed to harmonize human bodies with planetary rhythms? At sites like Giza, Stonehenge and Machu Picchu, many visitors report sensations of calm, focus, or even altered perception. Is it the grandeur, the sacred geometry, or something humming below the surface? Even if we discard the notion of electricity entirely, the concept of earth energy is deeply rooted in ancient thought. The Chinese mapped dragon lines. The Maya spoke of living mountains. The Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of song lines, paths of sacred power. Different words, same concept. And this brings us back to the pyramid, not as an isolated object, but as part of something bigger, a pulse point, a circuit. Not a machine in the traditional sense, but a harmonic structure designed to interact with its environment, planetary, atmospheric, cosmic. Could the pyramid have once balanced tectonic pressures, channeled lightning, filtered energies from celestial alignments. Theories abound. But none answer the most tantalizing question. Was it ever switched on? And if so, what happened when it was turned off? Perhaps it powered a civilization that no longer exists. Perhaps it operated for a cycle, a season, a purpose now forgotten. Or perhaps it never needed a switch. It simply exists. Always humming, always interacting with the Earth's breath, whispering its frequency into the soil, the sky, and maybe, just maybe, into us. So here we stand again, in the hush of ancient silence, staring at a triangle carved into time. Not a monument, not a tomb, but a tuning fork, a beacon, a forgotten node in a forgotten grid, one that might not be so dormant after all. The stars rotate above like an ancient dial, slow and deliberate, and directly overhead hangs Orion's belt. 3 stars etched in light, mirrored below in the colossal geometry of Giza's pyramids. Coincidence, say some. But the longer you stand between sand and sky, the harder that word becomes to use. This is not random, not accidental. The connection is too precise, too persistent across millennia. Welcome to the Orion Code conundrum. The theory, proposed most famously by Robert Bauval in the 1990s, is deceptively simple. The layout of the 3 pyramids at Giza mirrors the 3 belt stars of the Orion constellation, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. And it's not just shape. The slight offset of the 3rd pyramid, Menkaure, corresponds perfectly with Mintaka's position. Not roughly, not generally, perfectly. But the real kicker? The alignment doesn't match Orion's modern-day orientation. It matches the constellation's position around 10,500 BCE. In other words, the pyramids weren't built to reflect the sky above them, but the sky of a time 8,000 years earlier. Why would the ancient Egyptians care about the star layout of a time they supposedly didn't live through? Mainstream Egyptologists argue the pyramids were constructed around 2,500 BCE, which makes the 10,500 BCE alignment an enormous anachronism. Bauval and others argue this is evidence that the pyramids either preserve a memory from an earlier civilization, or were themselves constructed or inspired by knowledge from that distant epoch. Historians still argue whether the 10,500 BCE alignment is significant or coincidence. Critics point out that you can find star alignments in just about anything if you look hard enough, but this one is specific, deliberate, and connected deeply to Egyptian mythology. Orion was not just a constellation to the Egyptians, he was Osiris, the god of resurrection, of rebirth, of the afterlife. The journey of the pharaoh after death was said to follow the path of Osiris, ascending to the stars. The alignment, then, is not just architectural, it's spiritual, cosmological, symbolic of the soul's eternal journey. Now consider this. The southern shaft of the king's chamber points directly to Alnitak, Orion's leftmost belt star at the epoch of 2500 BCE. The northern shaft aligns with Thuban, then the North Star. The Queen's Chamber's southern shaft aligns with Sirius, the star of Isis, Osiris's divine consort. That's 3 shaft alignments with 3 of Egypt's most significant celestial deities. Not symbolic scribbles, stone-cut corridors hundreds of feet long, aimed with the precision of a surveyor's laser. The question becomes, were these just funerary metaphors, or were they mechanisms? Were these shafts meant to channel the pharaoh's soul to the stars, or to bring something else down? Let's entertain a thought. If you wanted to preserve the memory of a cosmic cycle, one that unfolds not over years but millennia, how would you do it? You couldn't write it down. Languages change. Oral tradition frays. You'd need a monument, built in harmony with the stars themselves. Something that said, this was the sky, this is the time. The Earth's axis wobbles over a 26,000-year cycle called the precession of the equinoxes. As this happens, the stars slowly shift in the sky. Ancient cultures may not have known the exact mechanism, but they observed its effects. They marked solstices, equinoxes, risings, and settings of stars with unwavering consistency. Over time, they would have noticed, the stars move, not by the hour or season, but over lifetimes. The 10,500 BC alignment of Orion's belt above Giza matches the moment when Leo, the Lion constellation, rose behind the Sphinx during the spring equinox, And the Sphinx, incidentally, faces due east, a lion facing the rising lion. It seems unlikely to be coincidence. This convergence, Orion overhead, Leo on the horizon, was unique to that era. And both sets of symbolism tie directly into Egyptian mythology. Osiris and Isis in the stars, Horus and the lion on earth. Was this alignment meant to mark a cosmic zero point? A kind of reset button? A message? Here is when it all began? And what if it wasn't just a message? What if the pyramids weren't just aligned to the stars? They were timed to them. Some researchers believe that the construction of Giza was part of a long cycle of celestial observation, timed to specific stellar events. Maybe the stars weren't just guides, they were triggers. If the pyramids were part of an energetic system, then perhaps their full function only activated when the stars were right. A celestial key in a cosmic lock. It's the architectural version of as above, so below, and in this case it's more literal than metaphorical. Let's zoom out. The Orion mystery isn't unique to Egypt. In Mexico, Teotihuacan's layout mirrors Orion's belt as well. In ancient China, the pyramids near Xi'an also show curious alignments with Orion's stars. It's almost as if civilizations across the world were fixated on the same stars, building not just upward but outward, using Earth's surface as their canvas. Were they simply copying the sky out of reverence? Or were they tapping into something more fundamental, an energy, a frequency, a cosmic geometry? The belt stars of Orion are among the most prominent in the night sky, but they are also part of a star nursery, an area of intense energy and star formation. Modern telescopes reveal Orion's belt as part of a vast molecular cloud, a stellar womb of sorts. Could ancient cultures have somehow sensed this? Or did they inherit that knowledge? Some fringe researchers suggest that Orion isn't just a celestial marker, but a memory, a place, a story whispered down through the mythologies of Atlantis, Egypt, Sumer and beyond. That the builders of Giza encoded this cosmic address as both origin and destination, their heaven, their homeland, or even their blueprint. And it gets stranger. In 1994, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Osiris beneath the Giza Plateau, a series of subterranean chambers accessible only via vertical shafts and water-filled corridors. It wasn't a mythological metaphor, it was real. A physical tomb beneath the earth, aligned once again with the belt stars. Symbolism, certainly, but the detail is chilling. They were building their underworlds to match the heavens. This interplay between sky and stone, between Orion and Osiris, has haunted researchers for decades. What message, what function, what prophecy lies hidden in that mirror? The Orion conundrum doesn't give answers. It poses questions, dense, uncomfortable, exhilarating questions that stretch the bounds of archaeology and astronomy alike. If you align a monument to the stars, you're not just building for your time, you're building for eternity. You're saying, when these stars return, so will the knowledge. Maybe the pyramids aren't just aligned to a celestial event, maybe they are part of it. And so here we are, standing in a geometry of secrets, with Orion gleaming overhead like an old friend you've forgotten you remembered. The air feels charged, the sand still. The pyramid doesn't look like a tomb anymore. It looks like a timestamp, a transmitter, a map, and maybe, just maybe, we're beginning to read it. The moon slides further down the sky, its silver fading toward a softer, bluer hue, and the pyramid stands stoic, casting longer shadows across the sand. But tonight, it is not the monument's bulk that draws our attention. It's the emptiness within. Not the well-mapped corridors or the lofty king's chamber, but the silent spaces we can't see. The voids. The ones we're not supposed to know about. The ones that science found, and then promptly stopped talking about. In 2017, the world of Egyptology got a jolt. A team of researchers using a technology called muon tomography, a method that detects particles created by cosmic rays passing through solid matter, discovered a previously unknown chamber inside the Great Pyramid. It wasn't a minor niche or a small cavity. This was a massive space, over 100 feet long, positioned directly above the Grand Gallery. It became known simply as the Big Void. Its discovery should have been earth-shaking. Another chamber inside the most studied, most measured, most iconic structure on the planet. And yet, after the initial burst of headlines and cautious academic excitement, everything went quiet. No follow-up scans, no drilling proposals, no robotic probes, no press conferences. The void is there, confirmed. But officially, we are not interested. Historians still argue whether the void has any function or importance. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities dismissed it as structural, a relic of construction left hollow for weight distribution. But engineers point out that such a massive void would be an unusual and unnecessary structural choice. And more importantly, its shape and position are suspiciously deliberate, aligned perfectly above one of the most mysterious architectural features in the pyramid. Let's pause and take that in. The Grand Gallery, a massive ascending corridor 28 feet high, corbelled in 7 steps with strange notches along its walls and no clear purpose, has another hidden corridor running above it. Not a shaft, a hall. Why? No construction documents exist, no references in ancient texts, no carvings that mention the void. It was hidden for over 4,000 years, and had we not peered through the pyramid using particles from outer space, it would still be a secret. Some researchers theorize the void could house a yet undiscovered artifact, possibly metallic in nature, perhaps one with electromagnetic properties. Others speculate it might be a resonating chamber, intentionally left empty to enhance vibrational energy in the structure. And still others wonder whether the void might once have been filled with something long removed. There's precedent for this line of thought. In the king's chamber, that famous granite box, often called a sarcophagus, is too large to fit through any known passage. It had to be placed during construction. So if a similar sealed chamber existed above the Grand Gallery, it could likewise contain, or have contained, something placed deliberately before the pyramid was finished. A power source, a record vault, a relic. But nobody seems eager to find out. The official silence around the void has led to increasing suspicion among independent researchers. Some whisper of bureaucratic politics. Others claim deeper reasons: protection of national identity, control of historical narrative, or perhaps something even more unsettling, a knowledge deemed too disruptive to reveal. Because if the void is functional, not just architectural, then everything we thought we knew about the pyramid's purpose is up for grabs. And it's not the only hidden chamber. Infrared thermal scans conducted in 2015 revealed temperature anomalies along the pyramid's eastern face. 3 specific stones near the base heat up differently than the surrounding blocks, even at night. Engineers scratch their heads. Variations in airflow? Unlikely. Internal cavities? Possible. But once again, investigations quietly halted. Why are we so reluctant to open the doors? The pattern is becoming familiar. Discoveries are made. They point to something big, something different. And then, nothing. No excavation, no scanning, no serious follow-up. Just sand, silence, and a new layer of mystery. Take, for example, the closed-off shafts inside the Queen's chamber. In the 1990s, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot called Upwout, meaning opener of the ways, into the southern shaft. The robot travelled 65 metres before hitting a tiny door, an angled limestone block with 2 copper handles, a sealed endpoint in the heart of the pyramid. Years later, another robot was allowed in, this time from the northern shaft. It too discovered a blockage, identical in design. Beyond these doors, unknown. In 2011, the JEDI project was formed, an international collaboration to explore behind the first door in the southern shaft. A new robot was developed. It drilled a small hole through the door and inserted a fibre optic camera. What it saw on the other side was unexpected. Another chamber, with another door, a second sealed barrier, still unexplored, and then the project was shut down. The robot never returned. The second door remains closed, no further access permitted. Why all the closed doors, both literal and institutional? Maybe what lies beyond is nothing, empty stone, dead ends. But the silence is louder than any echo, and the longer it persists, the more people begin to wonder, what are we not supposed to find? Some theorists believe these sealed chambers may be part of a larger vault system, storage spaces for scrolls, devices, or knowledge deemed too sacred for common access. Others suggest the voids were resonance chambers, part of a functional machine whose tuning depends on empty space. Still others think these rooms may once have been filled with water, chemicals, or energy-conducting materials, now long removed or evaporated. Then there's the question of intentional concealment. If the builders wanted to hide something, not just physically but conceptually, they would have done exactly this. Masked it with emptiness, embedded it so deeply into geometry that it could only be revealed by technology unavailable until our time. Perhaps the pyramid is not a tomb but a puzzle, one that only unlocks when humanity is ready, or desperate enough, to solve it. And what about access? We don't blast open pyramids anymore, not officially. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities tightly controls any excavation or exploration of Giza. Proposals for new studies are routinely denied or delayed. Even international teams with credentials and funding often wait years for approval. Meanwhile, technology races ahead. Our ability to scan, model and probe without damaging structures grows by the day, and yet the world's most famous monument remains in many ways untouched. A book half read, a vault unopened. One can't help but wonder, is this caution or curation? The Great Pyramid is more than a relic. It is a national symbol, a religious artifact, a political football, and an economic engine. Millions visit each year. The narrative must be protected. Not out of conspiracy perhaps, but continuity. If the pyramid becomes something other than a tomb, the ripple effects will stretch through academia, theology, and national identity. And maybe that's why the voids stay sealed. But voids are not emptiness, they are potential. They are possibility. They are whispers left unsaid. And so we stare at the pyramid again. Not at its mass, but its absences. We picture the hidden corridors, the unopened doors, the sealed rooms lined with stone and time and secrecy. And we realise the biggest secrets may not be buried. They may be floating in silence right above us, waiting for the right frequency or the right question. Night lingers like an old friend now, settled deep into the bones of the Giza plateau, and though the winds have calmed, the ground itself feels like it's holding something back, something pressing against the lid of history, sealed not just beneath stone, but beneath layers of silence and stubborn refusal. And if the pyramids are the crown of Egypt's ancient enigma, then the Sphinx, half lion, half god, guards the root. We turn our eyes now to that timeless guardian crouched at the edge of the pyramids, the great Sphinx of Giza. One paw forward, its face eroded and weathered, it stares forever east toward the rising sun. Or perhaps toward something else. Carved from a single mass of limestone, the Sphinx is enormous, 240 feet long and 66 feet high. It's one of the largest monolithic statues on Earth, and yet for centuries it was forgotten. By the time Napoleon's troops arrived in Egypt in the 18th century, only the head jutted above the sand. Most of its body lay buried, slumbering beneath centuries of wind-blown dust. But once uncovered, it asked more questions than it answered. For one, there are no inscriptions identifying its builder, purpose or name. That's rare in Egypt, where pharaohs stamped their achievements like a signature on every stone. There's also no contemporary reference to the Sphinx from the time of Khafra, the pharaoh many scholars believe commissioned it. This assumption comes mainly from the proximity of the Sphinx to Khafra's pyramid and valley temple. A now faded stela, the Dream Stela erected by Thutmose IV between the Sphinx's paws, mentions Khafra obliquely. But it's written 1,000 years after his reign, so we're left guessing. Khafra's Sphinx? Maybe. But nothing says so definitively. What we do know is this. The Sphinx is older than the temple next to it. Its body bears signs of erosion that differ significantly from nearby structures. Not wind erosion, the kind you'd expect in a desert, but water erosion. Geologist Robert Schoch brought this to light in the 1990s. He pointed out that the Sphinx's enclosure, specifically the weathering on the walls, shows rounded vertical patterns consistent with rainfall, not sandblasting. Significant, prolonged rainfall. Which is strange considering the last time this region experienced that kind of climate was between 7,000 and 10,000 BCE. Historians still argue whether this erosion is due to rain, groundwater or later repair work. But if the water weathering theory holds, it would date the Sphinx to a time long before the Old Kingdom. Long before Khafra. Long before history began keeping track. That would make the Sphinx the oldest monument in Egypt by a wide margin. Older than the pyramids, older than the dynasties, older than any known written language. And if true, who built it? Some believe the answer lies in the body, while the Sphinx's face is thought to resemble Khafra, again, inconclusively, the proportions don't match. The head is too small for the body, leading some to speculate it was recarved, that the original head may have been a lion or something else entirely, and was later reshaped into a pharaoh's likeness. Why would anyone do that? Perhaps to claim it, to take ownership of something so old, so mysterious, that even the dynastic Egyptians themselves didn't fully understand it. Recarving the face may have been their way of making the monument fit into their narrative, but that's just the surface. Beneath the Sphinx, things get even more curious. In the 1990s, seismic surveys conducted by researchers John Anthony West and Thomas DeBecke revealed subsurface anomalies beneath the Sphinx's pores, large rectangular voids, chambers, rooms. They were cautious in their conclusions, but the data was clear. There's something under there, something hollow, something man-made. When they published their findings, Egypt's antiquities authorities were less than enthusiastic. The idea of hidden chambers, especially those that might predate the pharaohs, was not something they welcomed with open arms. But fringe researchers have a name for this elusive underground space. They call it the Hall of Records. According to certain ancient texts, most notably the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato, and later esoteric sources like Edgar Cayce, there once existed a great civilization before recorded history. Atlantis. When it fell, its survivors fled to various corners of the earth, including Egypt. Cayce, in a series of psychic readings in the 1930s, claimed that under the Sphinx was a chamber containing the records of this lost civilization. A vault of knowledge, blueprints, history, spiritual teachings, hidden until humanity was ready to receive it. It sounds outlandish, like fantasy. But the ideas didn't begin with Cayce. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked the earth and the land was ruled by divine beings. It was a golden age, predating pharaohs and pyramids, a time preserved in myth, but forgotten in fact. Some believe the Hall of Records is a remnant of that era. And here's where it gets strange. Multiple expeditions have sought permission to excavate under the Sphinx. Some have been quietly approved, most have been denied. Even when subsurface anomalies were confirmed by technology, further investigation was blocked. The official stance: there's nothing of interest beneath the Sphinx, but if that's true, why not prove it conclusively? Open the chambers, clear the sand, let the world see. The secrecy only fuels speculation. Skeptics point out that tunnelling beneath the Sphinx could destabilise it. That's a valid concern, but limited non-invasive exploration using modern techniques could yield answers without damage. So why hasn't it happened? Some suggest national pride. Others whisper of political pressures, religious sensitivities, or even fear of what might be found and what it could mean. Because if the Hall of Records exists, and it contains records from a civilization before Egypt, then history would have to be rewritten, not footnotes, foundations. Everything from the origins of writing and science to the rise of religion and kingship would be thrown into question. And some institutions, religious, academic, governmental, don't handle that kind of revision well. So the Sphinx keeps its secrets. It stares east toward the rising sun, toward Leo, the lion in the sky, which it may once have mirrored, toward a time when gods were real and pyramids were maps. It crouches atop whatever lies below, rooms filled with scrolls, machines, memory, or perhaps just silence. But even silence speaks. And the question grows louder every year. What's under the paw? Some researchers continue to push. Independent teams plan their own surveys. Drone imaging, ground-penetrating radar, satellite scans. Bit by bit, the technology is outrunning the gates. And when, if, that chamber is opened, we may find only stone and dust, or we may find the first chapter of a story older than time. But until then, the Sphinx remains the riddle it's always been. Not just carved into stone, but buried in it. A guardian, a key, a monument to memory so deep it forgot itself. The desert wind is stirring again, just a little, brushing over the stones like a breath, as if some ancient slumbering presence is stretching beneath the surface. The Sphinx stares onward, its gaze fixed on the horizon, but now our eyes turn away from icons and monuments to something even more elusive. The builders themselves. Who were they really? We've heard the names: Khufu, Khafra, Menkaure, the royal caste of Egypt's Old Kingdom. Their names are carved into temples and tombs, and their stories fill textbooks. But as the pyramid mystery deepens, a strange sense of absence grows. The craftsmanship, the precision, the scale, all seem to point not just to power and labour, but to knowledge. Advanced knowledge. The kind that doesn't just appear in one generation. So where did it come from? Mainstream archaeology credits the ancient Egyptians, of course, a culture that, according to orthodoxy, developed stoneworking techniques gradually and scaled up over time. But this model wobbles when you realise the biggest and most complex pyramids came first, and then things went backward. Later pyramids were smaller, sloppier, even unstable. The construction techniques seem to regress, not improve. It's as if the peak came at the beginning, like something had been inherited and forgotten. This has led many to consider another class of builders, ones not officially recorded in the dynastic lineage. A lost people, a lost order, a group known in myth and fringe history as the Shemsu Hor. Translated as followers of Horus, the Shemsu Hor are referenced in ancient Egyptian texts as semi-divine beings who reigned during the mythical Zep Tepi, the first time. According to the Turin King list and the Palermo stone, two of Egypt's oldest and most cryptic king records, these beings ruled for tens of thousands of years before the first pharaoh. Their reign, according to the texts, predates even Narmer, Egypt's supposed founding king. Tens of thousands of years? That doesn't just bend timelines, it snaps them. Historians still argue whether these reigns were symbolic, spiritual, or purely mythological. But the specificity of the records, the names, durations, and successions, suggests something more than fairy tales. After all, why would a civilization obsessed with dates, lineage, and legacy invent thousands of years of fictitious rulers and write them in stone? Some fringe scholars propose that the Shemsu Hor weren't gods, but the remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization, perhaps survivors of an earlier golden age, keepers of knowledge, architecture, astronomy. They didn't rule like kings, but as custodians, architects, engineers, the ones who remembered, and then they disappeared, or perhaps more accurately were erased. This idea finds echoes in the myths of other cultures. The Sumerians had their Apkallu, wise, part-divine sages who emerged after a great flood to teach civilization. The Maya told of the people of the serpent, creators who built cities and then vanished. The Dogon speak of sky ancestors who brought cosmology from the stars. Everywhere you look in ancient myth you find traces of teachers, builders, forgotten originators. So why don't we remember them? One possibility. The event that ended their reign wasn't gradual but sudden. A catastrophe, a flood, a pole shift. Something that fractured their world and sent the pieces into darkness. The survivors scattered across the globe may have tried to preserve what they could. In stone, in story, in sacred geometry. The Shemsu Hor might not have vanished. They may have faded into legend. Their works misattributed to later kings. Their knowledge recast as religious dogma. Their presence slowly overwritten. Some fringe researchers believe the earliest pyramids, and possibly the Sphinx, were built by these precursors, not as tombs or palaces, but as part of a larger plan, a knowledge grid, a harmonization of Earth and cosmos. And the pharaohs who came after, they simply adopted the structures, took credit, wrapped them in hieroglyphs and gold leaf. It wouldn't be the first time in history that conquerors repurposed sacred architecture. The Romans did it, the Crusaders did it, so did many empires after them. And if these early builders were truly lost, then perhaps the greatest lie of modern history is that we are the pinnacle. That knowledge moves only forward. But what if it's cyclical? Rising and falling like empires, like tides, like stars. Let's turn back to the evidence. The earliest pyramid, the Step Pyramid of Djoser, was revolutionary, but even it shows signs of experimentation. Stacked mastabas, additions and extensions, like an architect struggling to remember something half forgotten. Then comes the bent pyramid, odd angles, structural flaws, a sudden change in slope. Was this an engineering mistake, or a failed attempt to replicate something no longer fully understood? And then, the apex, the Great Pyramid. Perfection, precision, a structure that would require computer modelling and massive infrastructure even today. And afterward, decline, deviation, disrepair. This inverted learning curve doesn't make sense unless knowledge was being lost, not gained. And maybe that's what the Shemsu-Hor represent. Not a race of gods, not aliens, but memory. The memory of a time when humanity knew more, built better, reached higher. Some say traces of them exist, not just in stone, but in DNA. Genetic studies of ancient remains in the Nile Valley show anomalies. Northern African features mixed with sub-Saharan, and something else, something not easily classified. Could the Shemsu-Hor have been a different strain of early human? A culture advanced not in gadgets, but in understanding. Others point to the tools, or lack thereof. How do you shape granite with copper? How do you lift 100-ton blocks into place without cranes? The standard answers, wooden sledges, stone pounders, brute force, become less convincing the more you scale them. But what if those tools weren't used? What if the real tools are gone? Lost? Or hidden? There are ancient stories, mostly ignored, of vibrating stones, of sacred chants that softened rock, of tools that used sound and frequency. Legends, yes, but legends with echoes in modern science. Sonic levitation has been demonstrated on a small scale. Acoustics can shape matter. Cymatics, patterns formed by sound waves, reveal geometry hidden in vibration. What if the Shemsu-Hor understood this? What if they built not with muscle, but with harmony? And what if they didn't build to impress the gods, but to encode knowledge? The pyramid isn't just a structure, it's a message. The dimensions embed pi, phi, and the speed of light. Its alignment encodes the cardinal directions, the precession of the equinoxes and Earth's curvature. It's a user manual for reality, a library in stone. And the Shemsu-Hor? The librarians. They may not have worn crowns or built statues of themselves, but they left their mark, in precision, in proportions, in silence. And maybe, just maybe, their message is still being transmitted through the stones, the stars, and the stories we've mistaken for myth. As the night draws toward morning and the pyramid stands unshaken, its builders remain unseen, but not forgotten. Not by the desert, not by the stars, and not by those who still dare to ask, who really built this? The stars begin to fade now, a soft thinning of the night's tapestry, but the chill of ancient riddles clings stubbornly to the air. We've walked the polished chambers and the forgotten voids, followed silent shafts to the stars and stepped beneath the paws of the Sphinx. And yet, the mystery of who built it all remains entwined with another question. When? If the Great Pyramid is not a mere tomb, but a structure of purpose, precision, and resonance, then the question of its true age looms as large as the structure itself. Mainstream archaeology pegs its construction to around 2560 BCE, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. But what if it's far older? What if the pyramids weren't built during Egypt's rise, but before it? To go further back, we must look not at the stones themselves, but at the stories, the oldest ones, the myths and flood legends, the echoes of cataclysm that ripple through cultures around the globe. Because long before Herodotus walked the Nile's banks and scribes carved glyphs into limestone, people were telling the same tale, of a flood, of a fall, of something great washed away by water and time. And here's where things get uncomfortably consistent. In Sumer, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Only one man, Utnapishtim, survives by building a vast boat. In the Bible, it's Noah. In the ancient Vedas, Manu. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, a great flood ends the third creation. In almost every corner of the world we find versions of the same narrative. A great civilization, a moral decline, a divine flood, and a few survivors tasked with remembering. These aren't simply overlapping myths. They're synchronized signals, echoes of something real. Something that once happened, violently, globally, and with such magnitude that it left scars in stone and memory alike. Historians still argue whether these flood myths refer to regional disasters, the melting of glaciers at the end of the Ice Age, or symbolic spiritual metaphors. But geological evidence suggests that something did happen, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This was the Younger Dryas, a sudden and dramatic return to glacial conditions after the last ice age had begun to thaw. For centuries it remained a geological footnote, but more recently, researchers have proposed something far more explosive, that this period may have been triggered by a cosmic impact. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, though controversial, posits that a comet or fragments of one struck Earth around 10,800 BCE. The result? Instant climate reversal, massive floods, shock waves, and perhaps the end of a civilization we no longer remember. What if the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, predate this cataclysm? What if they were not constructed as symbols of power, but as survivors' monuments, markers of memory, messages from a world that perished beneath waves and ice? There are clues. We've already seen the astronomical alignment of the pyramids to Orion's belt, perfectly matching the sky of 10,500 BCE. The Sphinx, too, shows signs of weathering by rainfall, despite the region being bone dry for over 5,000 years. And deep beneath the surface, buried under sediment and shifting sand, archaeologists have discovered signs of even older structures, foundations, tunnels, chambers cut into the rock long before dynastic Egypt laid its first bricks. Some theorists suggest that what we call Egyptian civilization was actually a revival, that after the flood, or the comet, or the pole shift, what remained of a once great culture slowly reassembled itself along the Nile, guided by fragmented memory and salvaged wisdom. This idea is not entirely fringe. Even Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, records the story of Atlantis as told by Egyptian priests. According to his account, the priest told Solon that the Greeks were children compared to Egypt's true history. They claimed to remember cities older than Athens, built when the Nile Delta was still marshland, and they spoke of a time, 9,000 years before Solon, when a great civilization was lost to the sea. Plato didn't invent the story, he recorded it. Whether Atlantis was real or allegorical, the Egyptian priests believed something massive had happened, and they believed their temples, and perhaps their pyramids, carried the memory of that event. Other ancient cultures echo this. The Dogon of Mali claim their ancestors came from a land destroyed by water. The Zulu speak of skyboats that once brought knowledge. The Maya record multiple epochs, each ending in destruction, the last by flood. What if the pyramids are remnants of one such epoch? Modern dating techniques struggle with stone. You can't carbon date granite, but you can date what's on it. Organic material trapped in mortar, or sediments in surrounding structures. Still, these give dates that reflect usage, not origin. If the Great Pyramid was built, or rebuilt, on top of older foundations, we wouldn't necessarily know. And here's where things get truly strange. The ancient Egyptian calendar begins not in 3000 BCE, but in 36,525 BCE. That's when their calendar's 0 point begins, marking a celestial alignment that will not repeat for another 26,000 years. Why pick such a date? Did they calculate backward, using knowledge of precession? Or were they preserving an origin date passed down through millennia? Some researchers suggest the Great Pyramid is a marker of time, not just measuring days or seasons, but the Earth's axial wobble itself, a great clock, slowly ticking off a cycle of ages. The Hindu Yugas, the Mayan Baktuns, the Egyptian Zep-Tepi, all of them may be fragments of the same cosmic rhythm. It's no coincidence that the pyramids are aligned with precessional markers, or that the numbers embedded in their dimensions reflect planetary constants. Whoever built them wasn't just watching the stars, they were mapping time, they were preserving memory. And if the pyramids survived a global catastrophe, then their function wasn't ceremonial, it was archival, a memory vault, a calendar in stone, a message that says, we were here, we knew. So why don't we hear about this in history class? Because it would rewrite the narrative. History as taught is a linear ladder, primitive tribes, agriculture, city-states, empires, enlightenment. But what if that ladder is actually a spiral? What if civilization rises and falls in waves, and we are just the latest crest? The flood myths, the precession alignments, the erosion, the voids, the missing blueprints, all point to a deeper, older story. One buried beneath centuries of dust, dogma, and denial. And maybe that's the real reason the pyramids were built, not to glorify a king, not to house a mummy, but to anchor a memory too precious to lose, a record of a time before the flood, before history, when we knew who we were, when the earth sang and we knew the song, as the first hints of dawn creep over the horizon, and the Great Pyramid catches the light once more, one thing is certain. Whatever its age, whatever its origin, it was not built in ignorance. It was built by those who remembered. The eastern sky is blushing now. a gentle gradient of indigo and rose stretching over the desert as dawn begins its slow approach. But even as sunlight returns to Giza, the deepest shadows remain, not on the sand, but in the minds of those who gaze at the hieroglyphs and wonder why some things refuse to be read. Because as mysterious as the pyramids themselves may be, one enigma may run even deeper: the strange language, or languages, that came before writing as we know it. Hieroglyphics are iconic. They line tomb walls and temple columns with intricate symbols, each pictograph a portal into a long-lost world. But even hieroglyphics, rich and complex as they are, have a starting point, and like any script, they raise a question that still haunts linguists and historians alike. Where did this come from? Mainstream scholars date Egyptian writing to around 3200 BCE, developing in tandem with early Sumerian cuneiform. Hieroglyphics were originally logographic, symbols representing whole words, and later incorporated phonetics. Over thousands of years, the script evolved, simplified, and eventually gave way to Coptic and other languages. But beneath this tidy linguistic timeline lies something stranger, because there are symbols in Egypt, some carved, some painted, that don't seem to fit anywhere in the script's evolution. They don't match known hieroglyphic vocabulary. They lack phonetic associations. Some appear entirely out of place, more abstract, more mathematical, more alien. Welcome to the mystery of the proto-scripts. These are markings found on the oldest walls of Egypt's earliest structures, on stone slabs near Abydos, on granite columns in the Osirian. Even, some believe, embedded subtly within the geometrical layout of the Great Pyramid itself. They're not writing in the sense of recording shopping lists or hymns. They're codes, symbols, glyphs, whose meanings remain entirely opaque. Some of these resemble ideograms found in other ancient places, the undeciphered symbols of the Indus Valley, the swirling petroglyphs of the Americas, the so-called language of the Dropa stones in China. Could these be remnants of a pre-literate symbolic system, a universal code perhaps, meant not to be read but to be intuited? Historians still argue whether these symbols are a writing system, sacred decoration, or simple ornament. But many alternative researchers suggest something more profound, a lost symbolic language, possibly belonging to a forgotten civilization, or a different kind of communication altogether. What if these markings weren't just linguistic, but energetic? Think of cymatics, the study of how sound frequencies create visible patterns in matter. When sand or water is exposed to certain tones, it arranges itself into repeating, often complex geometrical shapes. Some of the more intricate symbols from Egypt's earlier structures closely resemble these cymatic patterns. Could this lost language be a visual representation of sound? If so, then it wasn't meant to be read with the eyes. It was meant to be felt, resonated, experienced, and this opens another strange door. We've already explored how sound might have been used in pyramid construction or energy manipulation. But what if it also played a role in communication? A kind of language that wasn't written or spoken, but sung or vibrated. A language of frequency. That might sound far-fetched, until you realise the human body is a resonant instrument. The bones of the inner ear detect sound, yes, but so do the skin, and even the bones. The heart rate can synchronise to rhythm. The brain can be entrained to frequency. Could the builders of the pyramids, who clearly understood geometry, resonance, and the movement of celestial bodies, also have understood language in a completely different way? Not as verbal symbols, but as vibrational keys. Some researchers believe that the earliest sacred texts, including certain verses in the Vedas or Sumerian incantations, may preserve echoes of this frequency language. Not in their literal meaning, but in their structure, their rhythm, their sound. And here's where it gets weirder. Inside the Osirion at Abydos, a subterranean temple that appears older than the temple built directly above it, a flower of life symbols etched into granite pillars. These perfectly circular, overlapping geometric designs appear as faint burn-ins, almost laser-like in their precision. No other markings surround them. No inscriptions, no explanations. Just the symbols. What are they? Some say they're decorative. Others claim they are ancient representations of sacred geometry, blueprints of creation itself. The patterns are identical to those seen in Leonardo da Vinci's sketches, in medieval mandalas, even in modern quantum physics visualizations. Again, the question, coincidence, or memory. It's worth noting that the Osirion doesn't seem to belong to the era in which it's officially placed. Its massive, rough-cut granite blocks are more similar to megalithic constructions than the polished finish of the New Kingdom temple above. Like the pyramids, it's another structure that appears to have come before. And here's the twist. Many of these early symbols, those that don't align with formal hieroglyphics, don't appear in later Egyptian writing. They vanish. Phonetic writing takes over. Myth replaces geometry. Something was lost. What could make a civilization so advanced in measurement, astronomy, and architecture forget its own language? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it didn't forget, but was forbidden. Some scholars propose that esoteric knowledge in ancient Egypt was always divided. The exoteric for the public, the priesthood, the stories, and the esoteric for the initiated, the hidden truths passed in ritual and symbol. Maybe the proto-language, whatever it was only meant for the few. Not because it was elite, but because it was powerful. And power is always dangerous in the wrong hands. Even in modern times we've seen this. Nuclear physics isn't written in children's books. Complex formulas don't circulate in pop culture. Knowledge, especially the kind that shapes reality, is often veiled. And perhaps the pyramids and temples were never meant to tell everything. Perhaps they were meant to hint. We assume that because something isn't translatable, it must be meaningless. But what if that's the point? What if these symbols, etched on ancient stone, were not designed to be translated but to activate, like a tuning fork for the soul? In the ancient mystery schools, it's said that knowledge was not taught but remembered, that truth didn't need to be explained, only awakened. Maybe these symbols were keys, maybe they still are. Today, linguists are working to decode lost languages using AI, machine learning, and statistical models. We're closer than ever to unravelling Linear A, the Indus script, even Etruscan. But the symbolic code of ancient Egypt, the pre-hieroglyphic, pre-dynastic language, remains stubbornly silent. And yet, we see it. In the geometry of the pyramids, in the layout of temples, in the ratios of circles and squares and triangles carved not for decoration, but for declaration. It's not about reading in the conventional sense, it's about resonance. So next time you see a photograph of a symbol carved into a wall, pause. Don't just ask what it means, ask what it does. Because maybe, just maybe, the real language of the ancients wasn't meant for the eyes at all, it was meant for the earth, and for those still willing to listen. The light is full now, soft and golden, sliding across the Giza plateau and catching the sharp edges of ancient stone with a painter's care. Tourists are arriving, cameras lifted, eyes squinting in awe. They see wonder, they see mystery. But what they don't see, what most never do, are the voices that have gone silent, the ones that asked too many questions, dug too deeply, found something they maybe weren't supposed to. Because for every researcher who proposes a radical idea about the pyramids, there's another who quietly vanishes from the conversation. Not literally, no dark alley disappearances, but something subtler. Funding revoked, access denied, professional reputations quietly frayed until speaking out becomes career suicide. The story of the pyramids is not just a tale of ancient stone, it's also a modern epic of control, suppression, and vanishing curiosity. Let's begin with an inconvenient truth. Academia is not a neutral field. It's a structure, like a pyramid of its own, with rules, hierarchies, and gatekeepers. Publishing requires peer review, and peer review requires adherence to consensus. The further your ideas stray from the accepted narrative, the harder it becomes to be taken seriously, no matter how good your evidence. Historians still argue whether this is due to intellectual rigour or institutional fear. But the result is the same. When someone uncovers evidence that threatens to overturn the tidy timeline of Egyptian history, they are almost always met with resistance. Not just from Egypt's own Ministry of Antiquities, but from a global network of museums, universities, and publishing houses that have all staked reputations on the existing story. One of the most famous examples is Graham Hancock. Author, journalist, and independent researcher, Hancock has long argued that an advanced civilization existed before recorded history, one that left its legacy in monuments like the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, and others. He's been labelled everything from a visionary to a pseudoscientist. But what's consistent is how aggressively he's been dismissed by the academic establishment, even when his proposals are supported by hard data. like satellite imagery or geological analysis. In interviews, Hancock describes being barred from excavation sites, blacklisted from journals, and subjected to media hit pieces. His theory? It's not that he's wrong, it's that he's disruptive, and institutions don't like disruption. He's not alone. Robert Bauval, the engineer who popularised the Orion correlation theory, faced similar backlash. His research showing the pyramids align with Orion's belt, and the implications for dating the monuments to 10,500 BCE was met with ridicule by Egyptologists. And yet, no one has definitively disproved it. The data is there, the alignment is real. And yet, Bauval too found himself quietly edged out of mainstream discussions. His books were bestsellers, his ideas captivated millions, but his academic invitations dried up. Another case, Thomas Debicki, the geophysicist who, along with John Anthony West, analysed the Sphinx enclosure and found signs of water erosion. Their conclusions pointed to a much older date for the Sphinx, perhaps as old as 7,000 to 10,000 BCE. The geological data was peer-reviewed, but Zahi Hawass, then head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, dismissed the theory with a wave of his hand. Hawass himself is a central figure in this strange dance between science and censorship. Charismatic, protective of Egypt's antiquities, and deeply committed to the orthodox narrative, he has both opened doors and slammed them shut, depending on who's knocking. There are stories, quiet ones, of researchers who uncovered anomalies during sanctioned digs, only to have their permits revoked before they could publish. Origin of photographs disappearing from archives, or of renovations that conveniently covered up unexplained features with concrete, paint or new signage. None of this is proven in court, but the pattern is unmistakable. There's also the issue of access. Want to scan beneath the Sphinx? You'll need years of permits. Want to explore the second void inside the Great Pyramid? Good luck. Even after the Mun scan revealed it in 2017, no further exploration has been permitted. No drills, no scopes, not even a fibre optic peak. Why? One explanation is preservation. The Egyptian government fears damage to sacred sites, and rightly so. The pyramids have suffered at the hands of tomb raiders, looters, and well-meaning archaeologists with pickaxes. But another explanation lingers, that some discoveries might be too disruptive. That opening one sealed chamber could unravel the narrative held together by textbooks, tourism and tradition. And that brings us to the economic layer. Egypt's antiquities generate billions of dollars in revenue through tourism. The Great Pyramid is more than a monument. It's a brand. And like any brand, it comes with a story, a powerful king, a precise tomb, an iconic history that's easy to market and easier to control. Disrupting that brand with talk of lost civilizations, secret chambers, or unknown energy technology. That's not just academic heresy, it's economic sabotage. Some whispers go even deeper. There are claims, unverified, but persistent, of excavations in the early 20th century that found objects never made public. Metallic scrolls, crystalline devices, objects that didn't fit into any known dynastic framework. According to these stories, such items were quietly removed, either into private collections or to national museums' locked storage. Again, no proof. Just patterns, objects that were photographed once, never seen again. Rooms mentioned in early expedition logs that have since disappeared. Statues with inscriptions that were copied but no longer exist in situ. And what about the explorers themselves? Sir William Petrie, one of Egypt's most respected early archaeologists, is rumoured to have had artefacts in his private collection that defied classification. Some say he found mechanical devices, even evidence of advanced tools. When he died, his collection was transferred to the Petrie Museum in London. But not everything. A portion of it, no one knows how large, was reportedly taken by British intelligence. Why? What could a colonial spy agency want with ancient relics? Again, speculation. But the pieces hint at a deeper game. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of this suppression isn't the silence, it's the lost potential. Imagine if every anomalous artifact, every unexplained scan, every fringe theory had been followed up with full rigour. Not dismissed, not ridiculed, investigated. Maybe we'd know what the voids contain. Maybe we'd know what's beneath the Sphinx. Maybe we'd know who built the pyramids and why. But instead, we are left with whispers, half-finished investigations, banned books, Theories mocked not because they're false, but because they are inconvenient, because they don't fit. And when something doesn't fit into a system built on control, whether political, academic or economic, it's pushed aside, or buried, or quietly removed. Yet the truth doesn't vanish, it lingers, in stones that don't erode right, in shafts that point to stars, in symbols no one can read, and in the strange silence that follows every new discovery, like the earth itself is holding its breath. So when we walk among the pyramids today, we're not just treading on the past. We're walking over questions no one wants to answer, and over voices that once tried. Morning rolls in with growing confidence now, the sky brightening from honey to pale gold, as sunlight settles on the limestone shoulders of the Great Pyramid. Shadows fade, details sharpen, and the monument becomes less mysterious and more majestic to the waking world. Tour buses arrive, vendors open stalls, the selfie sticks rise like periscopes. But beneath this daily rhythm lies a truth few notice. These ancient wonders may be sacred relics, but they are also fiercely protected assets in a much bigger game. A game of control, of narrative, of empire. Because while the pyramids themselves are silent, their story is anything but. And like all powerful stories, it has been shaped, retold, and, many would argue, rigorously managed by those who benefit most from how we understand the past. Let's begin with a simple fact. The story of ancient Egypt isn't just about archaeology, it's about authority. The official version of history that the pyramids were built by pharaohs as tombs around 2500 BCE is repeated in classrooms, guidebooks, museums, and television documentaries. It's safe, structured, and marketable. But it's also deeply entangled with modern political identity, religious orthodoxy, and international prestige. Historians still argue whether this version of history was shaped primarily by evidence or by empire. Because when Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, he didn't just bring soldiers. He brought scientists, artists, engineers, the savants who would give Europe its first systematic look at ancient Egyptian culture. Their sketches, translations, and theories laid the foundation for modern Egyptology. But they also did something subtler. They rebranded Egypt's past through a Western lens. Soon after, British and French institutions raced to dominate the narrative. They collected artifacts, translated texts, and built massive museum wings devoted to ancient Egypt. The Rosetta Stone became the crown jewel of British imperial scholarship. Egypt, though not theirs, was remade in their image, an exotic past to admire, but never to belong to. This is the origin of the Egyptian Renaissance in European art and academia. But it also marked the start of something else, a monopoly on interpretation. To question the established narrative was to challenge not just archaeology, but authority. Even now, permits to dig, scan, or film in Egypt are tightly controlled by government agencies. Anything that contradicts the pharaonic narrative, especially theories involving lost civilizations, alternative timelines, or foreign influences, is met with resistance. And it's not just academic turf wars. The Great Pyramid is the beating heart of Egypt's tourism economy, drawing millions of visitors each year. Hotels, restaurants, tour companies all thrive on a stable, marketable version of the past. The idea that the pyramids might not be tombs, or might be vastly older than advertised, introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is bad for business. It's also bad for political power. Modern Egyptian identity is tied closely to the narrative of uninterrupted civilization, from the dynasties to the Islamic caliphates to the current republic. To suggest that the pyramids predate Egyptian civilization as we know it doesn't just rewrite history, it risks severing a sacred lineage. It opens the door to uncomfortable questions. Who built them then? And why did that knowledge disappear? Which brings us to an even deeper layer, religious implications. Many scholars and theologians prefer the idea of history beginning in a neat window around 3000 BCE, with the rise of cities, writing, and kings. This fits the timelines of Abrahamic traditions. The notion of a technologically advanced civilization existing 10,000 years ago, possibly global in nature, possibly wiped out by a cataclysm, doesn't just rattle science textbooks, it rattles sacred texts. So when alternative researchers suggest the pyramids might encode cosmic constants, or serve as harmonic energy devices, their work is often met with hostility, not because of poor evidence, but because of the existential threat such ideas pose. That's the thing about power. It's not just about controlling land or people, it's about controlling the past. Because whoever controls the past controls the present, and whoever controls the present decides the future. And in this pyramid of historical narrative, every layer, academic, political, religious, economic, reinforces the next. But cracks have begun to form. The internet, for all its chaos, has become a sandbox of radical inquiry. Independent researchers, engineers, geologists, and mathematicians now share discoveries, compare notes, and model ancient structures with precision software that was unthinkable a generation ago. Satellite scans have revealed entire cities buried beneath the sand. Ground-penetrating radar has detected voids inside monuments that were declared fully explored decades ago. 3D modelling shows that some ancient sites display machining tolerances better than modern tools, and each new anomaly adds weight to a question few dare to ask. What if we've been wrong, not slightly off, not missing a few years here and there, but profoundly, systemically wrong? What if the pyramids don't belong to the history we've written, but to a history we've forgotten? This isn't just romantic speculation. It's a call to reevaluate how we value evidence and who gets to define it. In many cases, so-called fringe researchers are trained experts, engineers, stonemasons, surveyors, whose insights are dismissed not because they lack rigour, but because they challenge sacred cows. Not an Egyptologist becomes shorthand for not welcome here. But what if we need more than Egyptologists? What if we need acousticians, metallurgists, quantum physicists, indigenous elders, and yes, even poets? What if solving the mystery of the pyramids requires not a discipline but a chorus? Because the truth doesn't sit neatly inside a textbook. It hums beneath the floor of the king's chamber. It glows in the impossible angles of a granite box. It echoes in the silence between what we're told and what we see. And so, we arrive at the real question. Not, what are the pyramids? But, why don't we want to know? Maybe it's because knowledge is power, and real knowledge, disruptive knowledge, is dangerous. If the pyramids are older than history, then history itself becomes suspect. If the pyramids encode planetary geometry, then someone knew things we only rediscovered with satellites. If the pyramids were energy devices, then our ancestors weren't primitive. They were brilliant. And if the truth lies buried beneath politics, profit and pride, then maybe it's not the sand we should be excavating, but ourselves. The Great Pyramid doesn't hide. It doesn't need to. It simply waits, unmoved by the stories we drape over it. A monument not just to what we remember, but to what we are still brave enough to ask. And if you listen closely, as the sun warms its ancient stones, you might hear it murmur one last challenge. Strip away the stories, step outside the empire, and begin again. The day is in full bloom now, sun high, air warm, the city behind the pyramids alive with sound. But our journey has reached a different pace, slower, deeper. We've passed through stone and time, theory and myth, and now we arrive at the edge of something more difficult to define, purpose. Because if the pyramids weren't tombs, weren't simply monuments, weren't built by dynastic kings as ego projects, then what were they? It's the question that lingers beneath every other, one that has drawn scientists, mystics, architects and skeptics into a dance with the unknown for centuries, and the more evidence we gather, the more difficult the answer becomes. To find meaning, we begin not with the outer layers of limestone or the inner granite chambers, but with something we rarely consider in ancient architecture: vibration. From the moment modern explorers entered the king's chamber, they reported strange acoustics, a low hum, an echo that seemed to reverberate longer than the shape should allow. Even the granite box inside, the so-called sarcophagus, rings when struck. Not like a dull thud, but like a bell. That box is made from a single piece of granite, quarried from Aswan, over 500 miles away. It's so large it must have been placed in the chamber during construction, not afterward. But no body was ever found inside. No lid, no inscriptions, no funerary artifacts. Just a precision-cut, resonant cavity. Historians still argue whether this box was symbolic or functional. But to some researchers, it represents the heart of a machine. Acoustic engineers have tested the King's Chamber and found that its dimensions and materials amplify specific frequencies, particularly those close to 440 Hz and its harmonics. That's the tuning of the A note in modern Western music. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the harmonics produced inside the pyramid suggest that it was designed to resonate, either passively or as part of an active system. And resonance isn't just musical, it's energetic. In physics, resonance can amplify waves, sound, light, electricity. If the Great Pyramid is a resonator, it might not simply be acoustic, it could be electromagnetic. Enter Nikola Tesla. Tesla was obsessed with the pyramids. He believed they held a secret about energy transmission, specifically wireless energy, drawn from the Earth itself. His Wardenclyffe Tower was inspired in part by the proportions of the Great Pyramid. Tesla believed that the Earth had natural frequencies, standing waves, that could be tapped to deliver power across great distances. He may have been right. Recent studies have shown that the Great Pyramid can focus electromagnetic energy, particularly radio waves, into its internal chambers and the area directly beneath its base. This is not speculative. It's been modelled using advanced physics simulations. And here's where things start to connect. The pyramid sits atop layers of limestone interspersed with quartz crystal. Quartz, when subjected to pressure, generates an electric charge, a phenomenon called piezoelectricity. The chambers themselves are made of granite, which also contains quartz. The Nile, in ancient times, ran closer to the pyramid, possibly flowing beneath it at seasonal highs. Water movement, pressure, vibration, crystal, frequency. This is the vocabulary of an energy system. Some researchers believe the Great Pyramid was part of a global energy network, drawing power from the Earth and transmitting it, perhaps wirelessly, to other locations. Others suggest it was a harmonizing device, stabilizing the Earth's energy grid at a time of planetary instability. But perhaps the most compelling theory is simpler, that the pyramid was a healing machine. The ancient world was obsessed with harmony, sacred geometry, musical ratios, balance. In every system, from the Chinese meridians to Indian chakras to Greek philosophy, health was seen not as chemical, but vibrational. Disease was a dissonance. Healing was a return to resonance. If the pyramid amplified certain frequencies, and if those frequencies matched the natural vibrations of the human body or brain, then being inside might have induced altered states of consciousness, deep meditation, even visionary experience, like a massive tuning fork for the soul. It's known that ancient Egyptian initiates underwent rituals inside temples and tombs. Some involved fasting, sensory deprivation, or exposure to certain sounds. The King's Chamber might have been more than a chamber. It might have been an instrument. Modern researchers who spend time inside the chamber often report unusual effects. Dizziness, emotional intensity, profound calm. Some even report hearing sounds that shouldn't exist, tones without a source. Is this suggestion, psychology, or something more? We may never know for sure. But the pieces are there. The structure's alignment with the stars, the use of crystalline stone, the resonant dimensions, the internal shafts that don't ventilate but point precisely to sacred stars, the missing burial, the sealed voids. It all adds up to something very different from a tomb. Perhaps the pyramid wasn't built to honour the dead. Perhaps it was built to elevate the living. Not as a religious temple, but as a technological one, a machine for consciousness, a monument to frequency, a tool to restore connection, not just to the cosmos, but to the self. And maybe that's the real secret, because in all our theories, energy, resonance, calendars, floods, we tend to look outward, to the stars, to Atlantis, to technology. But the pyramid may have always been pointing inward. It's no coincidence that the path inside leads upward, from the descending passage to the Grand Gallery to the King's Chamber. It's a journey, a climb. Not just through stone, but through awareness. In ancient initiatory traditions, knowledge was earned step by step. Candidates spent days in darkness, faced their fears, died symbolically and were reborn. The pyramid may have encoded this rite, not as metaphor, but architecture. Perhaps the greatest truth the pyramid hides is not in what it is, but in what it does. It doesn't just tell us about the past, it invites us to become something more, to align, to remember, to resonate. The Great Pyramid remains, unshaken, unsolved, but not silent. It speaks to those who listen, not with words, but with waves, with geometry, with wonder. And if there is a message encoded in its stone, maybe it's not for the scholars or the skeptics or the bureaucrats. Maybe it's for you, not to decode with books, but to feel, to remember that you too are a resonator, and that some truths are not discovered, they are awakened. And now, as the sun stands tall above the desert, and the last grains of story slip through your sleepy fingers, it's time to let the questions settle like dust after wind. You've wandered through shafts and chambers, tiptoed through timelines and temples, traced lost languages with your breath. And though the pyramids remain, as silent, stoic and secretive as ever, you now carry something more. Not answers, maybe, but a deeper sense of wonder. So exhale. Let go of the dates, the diagrams, the debates. Let them drift behind you like caravan footprints in the sand. Let your thoughts soften into the quiet geometry of dreams. Maybe the pyramids were power plants, maybe calendars, maybe something more, maybe something less. But whatever they are, they remind us that mystery still lives in stone, and that awe is an ancient language we all remember, if only in dreams. The desert hums beneath starlight. The wind picks up a little, and somewhere a low tone echoes, not from speakers or strings, but from memory itself. It is the hum of potential, of something forgotten, of something waiting. So tuck yourself in, let the desert cradle you now. You've travelled far tonight. You've seen what few dare to see, and if you listen closely, you can still hear the pyramids breathe.